Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. Today we will see what if Naruto neglected parents trains his Jinchuriki sister instead of him. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. No, I want to go on a real mission for once, dat bayo. I'm tired of these chores. Touchin', screamed a red-headed, green-eyed, female Konogakure genin, her cheeks red with anger as she glared menacingly at the man behind the Hokage's chair. Her name was Mito Uzumaki Namikaze, and she was the pride and joy of Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki Namikaze. The yellow flash just sweat dropped at the exuberance of his daughter, glancing to his left at his wife Kushina, who was openly chuckling at her daughter's antics. He sighed to himself and rubbed the bridge of his nose, realizing just from that look alone that he wouldn't be getting any help from her on this matter, which made things worse as he knew fully well that Mito could be as stubborn as her mother. Masumi-chan, I just don't feel you're ready for a C rank yet. There are still some things we need to work on, Minato said to his daughter, summoning up all of the patience that he could muster. It wasn't the first time that Mito and him would get into an argument like this, and as such, he knew from experience just how difficult it was to get his daughter to listen when she really wanted something. These D ranks are crap. You and Kachin have trained me hard for years, and out of all of the genin teams here in Konoha, one with me and Kakashi-sensei on it will surely be more than enough to handle simple bandits. How else am I gonna find Onichan if I don't get there and explore? She shouted at him with a fuming expression on her face. On cue, the mentioning of Naruto had caused Minato and Kushina to wince, their heads drooping a bit. Naruto was always a sore subject with the two parents in particular, because every mention of him just reminded them of how much they failed to be good parents to him. It had been 7 years since Naruto had vanished from Konoha, and the worst part is, they didn't even realize he had been gone until Mito had pointed out how she hadn't seen him for a week. Due to Naruto not possessing chakra, or even a chakra network, they had focused on their daughter far so much that they had failed to give their son any of their attention. They weren't the only ones that were guilty, either. Kakashi had all but ignored Naruto, and Jiraiya considered Mito the apple of his eye, having little to no interest in Naruto. The only one who seemed to care was Tsunade, as the very second she had found out Naruto was missing, she immediately left Konoha with Shizune and Tonton in tow, and vowed to never return until she found Naruto, alive or dead. Mito blamed herself as the main reason that he had vanished, as because when Naruto was around, she would do everything to steal her parents' attention away from Naruto, and even blamed him for something she did. All because she felt he was beneath her for not having chakra. Ever since he left, though, she had realized what she had done, and vowed that she would bring her Nissan home, if it was the last thing she ever did. However, she had discovered a neat little thing she could to ensure her parents gave her access to a lot of stuff they wouldn't have let her have before. She often used Naruto's name to get what she wanted, and they would often cave to her demands, because they felt guilty for ignoring him when he was around. So, she knew that the perfect way to get a C rank going was for her to use his name. While she did feel regret over manipulating her parents like she was doing, she felt that she had to do it, because ever since he left, they had a tendency to baby her and overprotect her, as if they were afraid that she would up and disappear on them as well. If that's what she needed to do, then so be it. After all, ninjas used any and all tools at their disposal in order to achieve their goals, and that's what she was doing. Minato, predictably, caved in with a sigh. He ran his hand through his hair and muttered words under his breath unintelligibly as he sorted through the available C ranks, analyzing them and reading through them with a critical eye. After sorting through the papers a bit, he found one that seemed rather easy and simple to do. A simple escort mission to Wave, a bridge builder by the name of Tazuna needing a single team of ninja to protect him from bandits. It sounded simple, easy, and relatively safe for his daughter to take. At least, it was a lot safer than the other C ranks involved, which involved entering countries that had their own ninja forces. Most of them were in countries that had coldly neutral to Konohagakure at best, and he would be damned before he sent his daughter into an enemy country before she was ready. Shrugging his shoulders and having made his decision, he smiled at Mito and informed them of the details. I have a relatively simple mission for you, then, Team 7. A bridge builder by the name of Tazuna needs a team to protect him from bandits. This should be safe enough to send you. Think of it as a little test to see how far you've gone. Send Tazuna in, Amaka-chan. the Yellow Flash said to Team 7 for a moment, before calling out to his secretary. In a flash, a drunken old man with a bottle of sake clutched into his hand in a way that made it seem like the sake bottle was his most priceless treasure, and looked at the team assembled before. All I get are a bunch of brats, Hokage-sama? They look like a fierce enough breeze would shatter half of the bones in their bodies. He slurred out in a drunken haze, which caused Mito, Sasuke Uchiha, and Sakura Haruno to scowl in irritation. Minato shook his head in an exasperated manner, before looking at Tazuna with a serious gleam in his crystal blue eyes. I assure you that Team 7 is fully capable of protecting you from bandits, Tazuna-san. Bandits are rarely a threat to ninjas so long as the ninjas in question are adequately trained. Besides, you have my student Kakashi with you, so even if the genin aren't up to snuff, he should be able to deal with the bandits himself, Minato informed Tazuna in a patient manner, taking particular notice of the sudden nervousness that overcame the bridge builder. Minato noticed out of the corner of his eye that Kushina had also taken notice of Tazuna's nervousness, which was good as he didn't just imagine it. I am sure my cute little genin are more than up to the challenge of facing mere bandits, Minato-sensei. Sharingan no Kakashi said with an eye smile. Tazuna nervously nodded his head, and left the office, Team 7 doing the same. Somehow, Minato's uneasiness wasn't comforted by the reassurance of his student. The next day, it was a whole new day in Konohagakure, and Team 7 was alright right out the gates, in typical manji formation. Their forms were lax, as because they weren't expected to arrive in wave for quite a number of hours. Mito was giddy, as because that means that she could start looking for her Onichan and bring him home. That, and she was finally on a real mission, even if she found the client to be a useless old drunk. Taking the time to look at her surroundings, she chose to examine her teammates, one at a time. First, there was Sakura Haruno. Sakura started out as a shy bookworm with confidence issues a mile wide, but ever since Mito befriended her, she had come out of her shell, and was a kunoichi that the Uzumaki Namikaze could fully trust to watch her back. Perfect chakra control, decent reserves, a Doden affinity, proficiency in Iryojutsu, she was a well-rounded, and excellent teammate to have. She had even tied for kunoichi of the year with Mito, albeit it was because her book smarts had helped even out her inferior practical grades. Well, inferior to Mito, at least. Mito's paper grades, on the other hand, weren't as good as her practical exams, and that was what led to them tying. Then there was Sasuke Uchiha, a boy who was haunted by the massacre of his clan at the hands of his older brother, Itachi. Fully matured Sharingan, Kaden and Raiden affinities, excellent Genjutsu and Taijutsu, he was rising on up and up with the help of Kakashi-sensei, Sakura, as well as Mito and her family. They were very close friends at one point, until the massacre happened, then Sasuke pushed her and everyone else away, at first. However, her Kachin Kushina was a good friend of Sasuke's Kachin Makoto, and she didn't allow Sasuke to wallow in that dark pit he was in for long. Thanks to Mito and the rest of her family, Sasuke had come a long way to letting go of the hatred and desires of revenge in his heart. He still wanted to bring his older brother down, but now he wanted to do it as a team. There was very little she could say about Kakashi-sensei. He was a damned good ninja, and had taught all three of them quite a lot. It was mainly because of them that they had learned how to work as a cohesive unit. Then there was Mito herself, futon and Suiten affinities, excellent kenjutsu, massive chakra reserves. Mastery of her four-tailed Biju shroud, a sensor, she was a virtual powerhouse, if she may say so herself. All three of them had dreams, and they were going to achieve them together. She didn't know what she would do if she didn't have her team with her. Her thoughts were interrupted when Sasuke whispered in his ear about a mysterious puddle laying in the middle of the road. Blinking her eyes in surprise, she looked at the puddle, and narrowed her eyes in suspicion. Why would there be a puddle in the middle of the road, when it hasn't rained in days? Taking a glance at Kakashi and Sakura, she could tell by their expressions that they had noticed it as well. Considering they were all in the know, there shouldn't really be any surprises waiting for them. Just as they passed by the puddle, two Kirigakure Nuke Nin appeared out of the puddle, and rushed at them. Too bad for them that Sakura had prepared a genjutsu in advance, and quickly caught them in the Magen Jubaku Satsu Genjutsu, which froze them in place long enough for Mito and Sasuke to unleash a collaboration jutsu on them. Quickly forming hand seals, they called out the names of their techniques as Kakashi and Sakura grabbed Tazune and got out of range. Futon. Daitopa. Kaden. Gokakyu no Jutsu. In a flash, their techniques were unleashed, and the Demon Brothers were turned to ashes. After Team 7 high-fived each other, Kakashi turned to Tazuna and glared at him, demanding an explanation from him without saying a word. Tazuna started sweating nervously, and broke down in a flash, telling them the circumstances surrounding his duplicity. While Team 7 understood his plight, the fact that the client lied and got them involved in a mission that they clearly weren't ready for was something that they couldn't ignore. No matter how much Tazuna begged them or tried to guilt-trip them, they wouldn't budge. In a flash, they were sprinting back to Konoha, leaving a broken Tazuna crying on the ground as his last hope seemed to vanish in a flash. Or, at least, so it seemed to Tazuna. From his position in the trees, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed assassin observed the whole debacle between Tazuna and Team 7, finding it amusing that his baby sister would actually cut and run like that. This was good for him, because it meant he could perform his mission without that bratty redhead getting in his way and having Konohagakure try and drag him back home. He was well aware that the redhead was a censor, but since he lacked chakra, and get tight rein over his emotions, she had been unable to sense him. Deciding that now was the time to make his appearance, he jumped out of the trees he was in, and landed in front of the still kneeling Tazuna, looking down at him with a smirk. Tazuna, upon noticing a new person standing in front of him, stopped his sobbing, and looked up at the man standing over him. The bridge builder took notice of the symbol on the front of the man's outfit, and widened his eyes as he backed away. "What do you want?" Tazuna asked, shaking from head to toe in fear over the mere presence of the 17-year-old blonde in front of him. Mercenary Dao's smirk widened just a bit, and spoke up. "I am the man that holds your very fate in your hands, you miserable old drunk. If you don't wish to die, I suggest you listen up," he said in a derisive manner, which caused Tazuna to stiffen up and go silent. Upon seeing this, the assassin nodded his head and spoke once more. "I overheard your conversation about how Tazuna wants you dead. My name is Mercenary Dao, and I have been hired by a client, who shall remain nameless, to kill Gato. Since Gats has ninja after your head, I figure protecting your miserable hide will allow me to not only complete my mission, but collect some bounties while I'm at it. What do you say, old man?" he asked the man with that smirk still on his face. Tazuna's eyes widened in surprise when the person he thought to be an assassin sent to kill him said what he said. He was out to kill Gato? This was excellent news. His country could be free from that midget scumbag at last. He got on his hands and knees, clasped his hands and knees, and proceeded to beg. "I'll do anything if it means freeing my country from Gato, anything. Just please help me out," he begged Mercenary Dao desperately, which caused the blonde teenager to chuckle in amusement. Of course he would do anything to save his country. Tazuna and the people of Wave were wounded animals, and wounded animals were always desperate to get away. Which is why he saw this as a business opportunity for himself. He would be able to accomplish 3 jobs all at once in the same country. It just meant more and more money for him, after all. "Anything, you say? Well, in that case, I have a condition. When your little armpit of a country gets its economy back, your country has to pay me 10 million ryo, and not anything less than that when your bridge is done, and Gato is dead," Mercenary Dao demanded of the bridge builder, smirking much like a shark honing on a bleeding prey. Tazuna rapidly nodded his head, bowing to Mercenary Dao as he did so to show that he agreed. Seeing this, Mercenary Dao grinned excitedly and indicated for his new client to stand up, which the old wave-born man did. Mercenary Dao then made a shooing motion with his hand, telling Tazuna to lead the way. When Tazuna started moving towards the border to Wave Country once more. Time skip. Tazuna and Mercenary Dao continued on their way to Nami no Kuni, the bridge builder shrugging off the heavy mist that was rolling in. He seemed far more occupied with glancing at his impromptu employee every now and then. Mercenary Dao, having had enough of the constant staring, glared at the man with his teeth gritted into an irritated scowl and snapped at him. "Why do you keep looking at me, you accursed drunk? If you keep it up, I'll leave you with no eyes left to stare at me with," he growled at Tazuna, which caused said bridge builder to pale and stutter out an apology. "I am sorry, I was Jeju just wondering why you look like the Hokage," he quickly got out, which caused Mercenary Dao to quirk his lips up into an amused smirk. So that's what the staring was about, was it? He got that a lot when it came to people who were aware of what the Yondaime Hokage looked like. They often wondered why he looked so much like the man, and most of the time, it was his victims who asked him about his appearance. Feeling no need to keep the information about his connection with the Yondaime a secret, since he doubted anyone would come to the bridge builder with the intent to seek out his identity, he found no reason to deny the man of the knowledge about who he was. The man donated his sperm to the woman that birthed me into this world. That's all you need to know, now keep moving, he sneered at his employer, which caused Tazuna to gulp and continue on his way, his fear overriding the surprise he felt towards this young man being the son of the Yondaime. Like that, the journey continued, but not for long. The mist kept growing thicker and thicker, so much so that Tazuna was commenting on it. Mercenary Dao took that as a sign that there was something going on, and made sure to keep all of his senses peeled for any sign of trouble. His senses were extremely sensitive, on the level of a canine, since it helped him keep track of his surroundings at all times and hunt any targets that might be trying to flee from him. Finely trained senses only made him even more deadly, after all. Mercenary Dao's ears twitched when it heard the sound of a large blade twirling through the air behind him. In a flash, he forcefully pushed Tazuna to the ground, and then after folding his arms behind his back once more, back-flipped over the large Zanbatu and landed gracefully on his feet. The Zanbatu, which he recognized as the legendary Kabikurabachu, which if he wasn't mistaken, belonged to that of Zabuza Momochi. Interesting turn of events this was the thought of the blonde mercenary. No sooner than did that thought race through his mind, did Zabuza appear on top of the blade. Zabuza turned to look at the bridge builder, and took in the form of Mercenary Dao. Interesting, I was under the impression that it was Sharingan no Kakashi and 3 genin brats that were protecting that old drunk. Instead, I see a single blonde teenager, which just makes my job easier. Hand over the old man, and I don't have to kill you, whoever you are, Zabuza said to Mercenary Dao in a gruff tone of voice, assuming that just because Mercenary Dao was an unknown to him that he won't have any problem dispatching him. Poor Zabuza, he had no idea what was about to befall him. Mercenary Dao just let out a derisive scoff. It doesn't matter if you don't know who I am. After all, I couldn't care less what a corpse thinks of me. As for me handing over the old man, I'd prefer to let him keep his miserable little life, kill you and your miscreant boss, and collect my many paychecks, he sneers at Zabuza, which caused the demon of the hidden mist to narrow his eyes and jump off his Zanbatu. He then clenched the handle, plucked it out of the tree, and then thickened the mist with his Kirigakure no Jutsu. Now then, larynx, liver, spine, lungs, clavicle vein, jugular, kidneys, heart. All of them so vulnerable, which one should I strike? Zabuza asked, his voice seeming to echo in the mist. As Tazuna shook in his boots, Mercenary Dao let out a dismissive scoff. He could sense the killing intent in the mist, and easily deduced that that fanciful speech the demon of the hidden mist made was just some foolish attempt to make him shake in his boots. Mercenary Dao did not cower in fear, he made others cower in fear, and Zabuza was gonna learn that today, in his last few moments before he suffered a death most violent and painful. What are you, an underachieving lazy little boy? You should hit all of them, of course. No kill like overkill, he called out into the mist mockingly, keeping his senses sharp and open so that he could figure out when Zabuza was coming. Hearing the harshly blowing wind coming from a specific direction, he quickly intercepted what he thought was Zabuza Momochi with a well-placed knife handshot to his throat. Zabuza let out a choking sound, before he then dissolved into water. The real Zabuza then appeared behind Dao, and attempted to cleave him in two vertically with his Zanbatu. It seemed like he succeeded, as the cleaver went straight through him, but it didn't seem to do anything. Suddenly, what was supposed to be Mercenary Dao grew rather shaky and fuzzy, and then disappeared into the mist, almost as if it was just a mirage. Unknown to the A-ranked Noob Nen, Mercenary Dao had made excellent use of the Zanzoken, and quickly reappeared behind Zabuza. He performed a deadly fast palm strike that seemed to pierce directly through Zabuza's abdomen, which caused said Noob Nen to look down at the hand going through his body with bulging eyes, before Zabuza then turned into water again, revealing that it was yet another Mizu Bunshin. Mercenary Dao, with his arms still folded behind his back, jumped backwards as Zabuza attempted to cleave in half at the waist with his Zanbatu, before then lunging forward and landing a particularly mean left hook into the Kirigakure Nuke Nin's face. Hissing in pain, Zabuza staggered back a bit, and Mercenary Dao took advantage by kicking him in the abdomen with a quick front kick, and then using that same leg to then launch his foot skywards and slam the ends of his toes right into Zabuza's chin, which snapped the Shinobigatana Nananshu's head skywards. Thankfully for Zabuza, his neck wasn't snapped. Dao quickly attempted to perform a spin kick on Zabuza, only for the man to regain his bearings and spin out of the way, smashing his head forcefully into Dao's face, hitting him in the stomach with the pommel of his blade, and then slamming the flat end of his blade into the mercenary's body to smack him into the ground. Dao hit the ground with a loud crack, and actually bounced off of it for a moment from the sheer force of the hit. As he bounced off of the ground, he flipped himself backwards and landed on the blade of Zabuza's massive sword. He then brought his hands forward, and used the Mashingan Tasuki, assaulting Zabuza's stomach with a volley of fingertip punches, the last one sending the Nuke Nin forcefully into a tree. As Zabuza slid down the tree and hacked up a bit of blood, Mercenary Dao gracefully landed feet first on the ground again, and cracked his neck. Well, looks like the Demon of the Mist isn't all he's cracked up to be. Getting slow in your old age, has arthritis finally set in? He questioned the former shinobi swordsman with a chuckle. Zabuza's response was to glare up at him and start gathering hand seals. Sweden. Miserapa. Zabuza shouted, calling out the name of his jutsu as he spit a powerful wave of water out of his mouth and Mercenary Dao. In a flash, he quickly brought his arms forward, and took the brunt of the jutsu's damage to his arms. As the jutsu hit him, he stamped his feet into the ground and was slowly dragged backwards from the force of it, which caused his feet to make long, deep drag marks into the ground. However, the jutsu soon ended, and Mercenary Dao brought down his arms, which appeared heavily bruised and lacked sleeves. Clapping mockingly over Zabuza's little achievement, Mercenary Dao proceeded to sprint at his opponent, who decided to get away from the tree he was pressed up against. The Demon of the Mist growled in irritation over his opponent's continued mocking of him, and as the bloodlust gathered in his eyes, he attempted to kick Mercenary Dao away. Dao's response was to slap the offending appendage away, and brought his elbow down on Zabuza's knee with such force his leg bent at a painful angle. Grunting as pain shot up his leg, he was assaulted by a flurry of punches and elbow strikes that were aimed directly at his lungs, his throat, and his solar plexus, all of which were done for the sole purpose of knocking the breath out of Zabuza. Due to the damage done to his leg, Zabuza was hit by the strikes, and he gasped out for breath as he was forced to kneel from the pain in his leg. Mercenary Dao smirked down evilly at Zabuza, and lashed out with a quick kick to the temple, causing Zabuza to slam face first into the ground. Before Zabuza could get up, the assassin proceeded to pick up Kabikurubachu with one hand, and tossed it into the lake like it was nothing more than unwanted garbage. Upon seeing this, Zabuza was filled with rage, and slammed Mercenary Dao to the floor, assaulting him with stomps. Dao proceeded to grab Zabuza's foot, and snapped it painfully to the side, then threw Zabuza into the direction of the lake. You seem to have gotten rusty during your time as a Nuke Nin, Momochi-chan. Either that, or your reputation is highly overrated. Whatever the case may be, you're worthless garbage, Dao commented to the so-called demon in a scornful manner. Growling in an enraged manner, both from the words his opponent constantly threw at him, as well as the way the fight was going, he had decided that enough was enough. He had yet to see a single jutsu or any sign of chakra be used by his opponent, so he had assumed that his enemy didn't know how to use it. So, getting an idea, he quickly retreated to the middle of the lake, and started forming hand seals. You've put up a decent fight so far, but I have a bridge builder to kill, so I'll end this right now, Zabuza called out, going through his hand seal sequence and acting as if he had the match in the bag. Mercenary Dao, upon seeing how long he was taking to form what was clearly the Suiryuden no Jutsu, he had felt that it was time he put an end to this little match of theirs. Chuckling to himself, Mercenary Dao stuck out his finger, which started to glow. Dodonpa fire, he called out, before a thin, deadly fast beam rocketed towards Zabuza. Since he was too busy forming hand seals for his water dragon attack, he was thus unable to avoid the technique. As his life flashed before his eyes, Mercenary Dao's signature attack just cruised on past him and hit something in the trees. Caught off guard over being alive, he had decided to mock the mercenary. "I have no idea what technique it was you used, but it seems you need more practice. You didn't even come close to hitting me, amateur," Zabuza mocked, deeply enjoying his turn at doing the mocking for once. However, Mercenary Dao didn't seem worried in the slightest. In fact, all he did was start laughing. Irritated over this sudden outburst of laughter, Zabuza snapped out at his infuriating opponent. "What the hell is so funny?" he snapped out at the blonde mercenary. "I wasn't aiming for you. I was aiming for your masked friend in the trees," was all he said, which caused Zabuza's eyes to widen as a masked figure fell out of the trees and into the lake, quickly sinking beneath the waves. As Zabuza turned to look at his precious tool, his eyes bulged out in shock when he saw a perfectly circular hole going clear through the mask, through Haku's head, and out of the other side. The sight shocked him so much, that it actually caused him to momentarily stop his handseal sequence. Naturally, this hesitation was capitalized on by Mercenary Dao. "Don't fire," he called out again, firing one of his prized techniques at Zabuza. The demon of the hidden mist realized only too late what happened, and all he could do was turn around and watch as the energy beam pierced through his heart. Letting out a blood-filled gargle, the demon of the mist fell face first into the lake, and sunk with his partner into the waves. Grinning evilly over what had just transpired, he quickly dove in after his two victims, and proceeded to retrieve their bodies. He then pulled out one of his modified sealing scrolls, unraveled them, and sealed away the bodies and the sword of the two Kirigakure fugitives. With that said and done, he pocketed his scroll, and turned back to a shell-shocked Tazuna. "Well then, old man, I believe it's time we get you home, he asked the bridge builder, which caused him to nod his head rapidly, and quickly lead the man to his home where his daughter and grandson were. Meanwhile, in Gato's hideout, "Some demon of the hidden mist he is. Toothless worm is more like it," Gato mocked Zabuza after finding out that he and his masked apprentice had been slain, before he was silenced by the arrival of another Kirigakure ninja. The figure stepped into the light, revealing a long mane of red hair, and a shark-like grin filled with sharpened teeth. Strapped to this person's side appeared to be two katanas. "So, Zabuza has failed, has he? I wonder who was capable of such a feat. Whoever it is, should prove to be a fine meal, perhaps the finest there is. Rest assured, Gato-san, that this fine meal will be devoured, and you'll have your bridge builder," came the sultry chuckle of the red-headed kunoichi in the room, before she then stepped out of the light, and then seemingly vanished. After a while of traveling, Mercenary Dao and Tazuna arrived at the bridge builder's home. A surprisingly sober Tazuna walked up to the door, and knocked on the door. Dao's sensitive hearing picked up the sound of footsteps approaching the door from inside of the home, and just as soon as the footsteps stopped, the door opened, revealing an attractive young lady standing there. Mercenary Dao looked her up and down, placing her as nothing more than a housewife, and considering the expression on Tazuna's face, it appeared that he knew her. The fond smile on his face was what gave it away, after all. The woman, in return, smiled in a relieved manner, and hugged Tazuna tightly. Dao curled his lips up in disgust at the soft display of affection, but stayed silent, allowing the two their little moment. Once the two separated, the woman spoke up. "Tucson, I'm glad to see you're safe. Did you get those Konoha ninja like you said you would?" The housewife, who was now identified as Tazuna's daughter, spoke up to the bridge builder. Tazuna just sighed and rubbed his eyes. His daughter immediately picked up on the sadness her Tucson was feeling, and looked at him with a depressed frown. Naturally, the woman did not seem to notice the exceptionally deadly Mercenary Dao standing close by to her father. Dao wasn't surprised in the slightest, as it just showcased how utterly moronic and oblivious untrained civilians could be. "What's wrong, Tuchin? Are they not coming?" she asked her father with a surprised expression. While not necessarily super knowledgeable about how ninja worked in general, people from all over the elemental nations held at least some passive knowledge in how helpful and people-friendly Konoha was, always willing to lend aid to other countries. The fact that they would just leave the people of Nami no Kuni to their fate was something that didn't make sense to the civilian woman in the slightest. They were going to come, but when they figured out I lied about the mission details, even after I told them what was going, they decided to just leave me to my fate, Tazuna said, pulling the brim of his hat down. Tsunami's eyes started to water, and she appeared ready to faint at the thought of losing another person that she loved dearly. Tazuna, upon seeing the reaction his precious daughter had to what he said, quickly spoke up to try and get rid of her sadness. "Stay calm, Tsunami, because our people still have hope. This is Mercenary Dao, and he's decided to help us out, and he is damn good. I was attacked by one of the ninja Gato hired, and Dao just wiped the floor with him and his accomplice. So long as he's around, our troubles should be over," Tazuna said quickly, pointing to his left and revealing the semi-unknown assassin to Tsunami. Dao, upon hearing this, just sighed to himself. Great, just what he needed, to be revered upon by weaklings who cowered over the very mention of Gato's name. At least he'll wind up getting paid from this job one day, so he would do his best and keep his patience. Tsunami turned to look at the proclaimed mercenary, and looked at him with widened eyes. Although she could tell that he was obviously still a teenager, she could still tell that the pink-wearing assassin was a very deadly person. His outfit pretty much screamed murderer, after all, and the coldness in his eyes just further reinforced that this young man was not someone that was to be messed with. Tsunami's face paled just a tad bit as she looked at him, which Dao noticed, and responded to by smirking at her in an amused manner. Trying to hide her nervousness, Tsunami swallowed her fear and spoke up. Greetings, Dao-san. I appreciate you risking your life to help us get free of Gato's tyranny." Tsunami stuttered out a bit as she bowed to him in gratitude. Mercenary Dao didn't bother bowing back, as that was a sign of respect, and he didn't respect this woman in the least. He simply kept his arms folded behind his back, and scoffed at her. Did she really think he was doing what he was doing to help them? He couldn't care less about the troubles these weaklings had. The only reason he was doing this was for his own monetary benefit. Had he not been hired by the Tsuchi no Kuni daimyo, he might have wound up working for Gato instead. Only reason he chose not to kill Tazuna was because it was bad business sense to help the person your client asked you to kill. "I'm not doing it to help you, I'm doing this for my own monetary benefit. Your problems are insignificant to me, and the only reason I helped out at all was because I saw a business opportunity in helping out your Tucson. Don't think of me as some hero, because I'm not here to save you all out of the goodness of my heart," he said in a condescending manner, grunting at her and turning his nose up at her. Nothing disgusted him more than the thought of people viewing him as some hero who would swoop in, solve everyone's problems, and then give out free love and hugs to make everyone feel better. The mere thought of Mercenary Dao being such a goody-goody almost made him gag. Tsunami's eyes hardened over as she heard the way that Dao spoke to her, and the mercenary could tell that the woman would have liked nothing more than to hurl insults at him, force him away, and maybe even hit him. However, judging by the sweat he noticed gathering on her brow, he could tell that she was still very much afraid of him, and took that to mean that she was too afraid to ever try to do anything with him. She was a smart woman for holding herself back, because he would have felt no qualms about ending her life should she ever attempt such an abysmally foolish idea. Instead, Tsunami had swallowed once more, and bowed to him once more. "Even so, I thank you for choosing to take the job we wanted the Konohagakure ninja to take. I promise on behalf of Nami no Kuni that we'll find a way to pay you back when we are able to," Tsunami said to him after she stood up from her bow. Dao sneered at her and merely pushed her out of the way so that he may enter the house and get settled in, his arm placing itself back into a fist as it was folded behind his back once more. Tazuna caught Tsunami as she almost fell to the floor, and after helping her to steady herself, the two of them glared at Dao. While he may be helping them, they were far from happy over having him with them. As Mercenary Dao entered the house, he proceeded to look over his shoulder at the two. "I will be staying here, and I won't pay a dime, because you can consider my protecting your worthless hide to be payment enough, Tazuna. After all, so long as Gato still lives, your life will still be in danger," Dao said to them for a moment, before continuing on his way into the house with Tazuna and Tsunami following in after him, closing the door behind. Tazuna sat down at the kitchen table and started partaking in some sake, and Tsunami attended to some pot that was being cooked on a stove. Dao, meanwhile, sat down and started undergoing deep meditation. However, that meditation didn't last long, as just after all three of them got into place, Tazuna spoke up to the assassin. "All we have to do is finish the bridge, and Gato will lose his iron grip on the country. Even if Gato isn't killed, we'll still be free," Tazuna said to Dao in response to his comment about Gato still being a danger. The mercenary scoffed, finding that line of thinking utterly stupid. The worthless fool was just an innocent civilian after all, and as such, he was unable to see the flaws in that train of thought. While Dao did believe that there was nothing Gato or anyone else could do to stop the mercenary from completing his objective, he already knew of things that could be done to stop Tazuna aside from killing him. That's where you're wrong, you incompetent moron. So long as Gato lives, he is still a threat. So long as he has money, he can keep sending assassins after you. If Gato was desperate enough, he could just have his thugs set up explosives all over the bridge, blow up your giant heap of scrap metal, and then leave your people completely and totally crushed. There are many ways he could still defeat you without killing you, so long as he lives. You're just lucky that Gato is too damn stupid to go with such a plan. Dao scoffed at Tazuna, which caused Tsunami and the bridge builder to pale in shock once they realized he was right. Right as the conversation ended, the front door to the house opened up, and in walked a small boy. Dao glanced at the boy, and raised an eyebrow in curiosity. Judging by the facial expressions of Tazuna and Tsunami, it was someone they knew, most likely another blood relative. Taking a closer look at the boy, Dao could see the despair, the hopelessness, the utterly crushed hope and defeat in his eyes. Seeing such a thing caused the mercenary to smirk in amusement. Seeing such misery and defeat in such a small boy reminded me of some of the kills he had made over his career. "Kachin, I'm back," came the voice of the boy. When he got to the kitchen, he blinked in surprise when he noticed Tazuna sitting there. The boy's face lit up with a smile, and he ran over to greet the bridge builder. "Ah, so this boy happened to be Tazuna's grandson, was he? How nauseatingly quaint." Dao quietly placed his arms on the table and underwent his meditation once again, and before he could truly get into it, the boy seemed to notice his presence. "Who's this?" the boy asked in a suspicious tone of voice. Ah, the distrust, the suspicion, such a thing being shown by a child was quite amusing. The despair Gato dished out on this country must have messed the boy up something good. Either that, or there was a story he was missing. Regardless of what the reason, Dao found the boy's surly disposition rather amusing. It reminded me of the children that would hunt him down and try to get revenge for what he did to their families. He enjoyed the rage on their faces right before he could cut them down. As his thoughts turned darker, his amused smirk widened just that tad bit. Sadly, his thoughts were interrupted when Tazuna spoke up to his grandson. "Inari, this is Mercenary Dao. He's been hired to assassinate Gato, and he's decided to be my bodyguard in exchange for payment when we are able to pay him back," came the voice of Nami no Kuni's bridge builder, introducing his grandson to the pink-garbed assassin. "He's going to die, Sofu. You should just tell him to just give up and run away while he can," was what Inari said in reply to his oldest family member, the whining rather obvious. Mercenary Dao's nostrils flared in an irritated manner. Did this little brat just insinuate that Gato would kill him? Him, of all people? Deciding to teach this little boy a lesson, blonde-haired, blue-eyed mercenary quietly slid out of his seat, and proceeded to loom over Inari menacingly with his eyes narrowed into a menacing glare. Though there was no killing intent radiating from him, the mere presence of the assassin standing over him like he was caused the boy to whiten and shake with fear. Getting the reaction he expected from the boy, his lips curled up into a dark sneer, looking down at Inari the way someone would look down at a pesky fly or mosquito. The whole house became tense, no one made a single sound, and all three occupants of the house all stared at the assassin with nervousness and dread on their faces. None of the three people in the house dared to move for fear of provoking the sadistic mercenary. Whereas some people would stop there and be satisfied with the sense of dread they had instilled in someone that dared to doubt their skills, Dao decided to take it a step further. He slowly placed his right arm in front of his body, and pointed his index finger at Inari with a dark, malicious gleam in his eyes. Tazuna, knowing what the man could do with his finger, tried with all of his might to shield Inari, but the fear kept him held in place. "So, you think some short, pudgy little midget can kill me, do you, boy? You fear Gato, do you? Well then, let's see if that fear of him lasts after this," Mercenary Dao said. However, there was something interesting about his index finger. It wasn't carrying the typical glow that one would associate with his signature Dodonpa attack. However, that didn't mean his finger wasn't dangerous. as Dao was a freak of nature when it came to hand-to-hand combat, and he had the ability to use even just a single finger to deal massive damage to someone. In a flash, the man now called Dao launched his finger forward, and proceeded to impale it through Inari's abdomen, which caused Tazuna to shout in surprise, Tsunami to faint, and Inari to gasp out in pain. With a satisfied gleam in his eyes, Dao removed his finger from the hole in Inari's abdomen, and quickly wiped off the blood with a tablecloth. As Inari fell to the floor from having been knocked unconscious from the pain, Tazuna quickly raced to attend to Inari, and Dao merely just went upstairs, and quickly searched for the room that was his. He didn't worry about Inari dying, as due to his knowledge on human anatomy, he made sure to pierce through the brat's abdomen in a way that would ensure that he just lost some blood. He would have a large, hole-shaped scar when it healed, and he would remember the pain of having a finger pierced through his body for a long time, but he would live. Time skip. It was late at night, 12 a.m. in fact, and everyone else other than Dao was asleep. Due to some connections he had undergone a special body modification process that would allow him to operate at maximum efficiency with as little sleep as possible, which is why he was up at this time since he had already gotten all the sleep he needs for the day. Wearing dark blue nightwear and a pair of slippers, he had decided to make his way to a rundown bar to have a drink. The bar was filled with a bunch of bandits who appeared to take no notice of him, preferring to continue what they were doing before he had decided to walk into the bar. "What will you have?" the bartender asked gruffly. Tao Pai Pai ordered the strongest alcohol they had, and proceeded to pull out Rio from the wallet he had. Of course, doing so had resulted in two bandits taking notice of the vast amount of money he seemed to be carrying with him, and they grinned to each other as they quietly discussed a plan that involved ambushing him. Unfortunately for them, Mercenary Dao's excellent hearing allowed him to pick up the plan being discussed, and easily picked out the two in question as he sipped at his drink. While Dao wasn't an alcoholic or anything, he still enjoyed having a drink every now and then. He would never allow himself to get drunk, of course, but he would always drink just enough to get a slight buzz, strong enough to feel some effect, but light enough that would allow him to still perform at optimal efficiency. After he had downed his glass, he proceeded to push the glass towards the bartender, and walked out of the bar with his fists folded formally behind his back. Predictably, the two bandits who were planning on mugging him for his money followed after him, one wielding a crossbow, and the other wielding a spear. Mercenary Dao heard the obnoxiously loud footsteps of the two bandits following after him, and paid them no mind. They weren't really worth his time unless they decided to go through with that foolish little plan of theirs. "Hey you, with the braided ponytail. Hand over your wallet and everything else of value you have on you," commanded the voice of the bandit that wielded the crossbow. Mercenary Dao heard the command, but did not react to them at all. No change of facial expression, no verbal comment, no turning to face them, he didn't even stop walking. He simply continued his path back to Tazuna's house, not even bothering to acknowledge the worthless imbeciles. The two bandits growled at him, and once again tried to get his attention. "Are you deaf or something, you ugly, mustachioed bastard? Hand over your valuables." This time, the bandit with the spear commanded him, and yet again, Mercenary Dao did not bother acknowledging them. The bandits, who already had short fuses as it was, snapped after the man seemed to ignore them and just kept walking away from him. The bandit with the spear nodded his head to the bandit with the crossbow, and that caused the bandit to aim said weapon at the blonde-haired mercenary. With a pull of the lever, he fired a deadly fast crossbow bolt at Dao. Yet, it seemed as if Mercenary Dao did not hear the discharge of the bolt, as he merely kept walking away. Or at least, so it seemed to the bandits. In reality, Dao had heard the pulling of the lever, the sound of the bolt being fired, the whistling of the bolt flying through the air, and the whistling of the wind that alerted him to the oncoming attack. Without even bothering to stop walking, as he lifted his left leg open to bring it forward, he flung his foot backwards, causing the slipper to slide off of it and be launched up into the air at such speeds that it perfectly intercepted the bolt. As the bolt slammed into the floating slipper, the force of impact from the two objects colliding had caused the bolt to be ricochet off of the slipper and be propelled backwards at the bandit that fired the bolt. Before either bandit had time to react, the bolt impaled itself through the crossbow-wielding bandit's throat. With a single gurgle of death, the bandit fell over dead. When the slipper was hit, it was propelled forward, over the still walking Dao's shoulder, and fell to the ground in front of Dao right at the moment where he moved his left leg again, causing him to slide his socked foot into the slipper. He did that without even breaking his stride in the slightest, and he didn't even bother to make any acknowledgement of what he had done. The bandit wielding the spear was completely shell-shocked for a moment as to what just happened, but broke out of his stupor long enough to let out a curse and charge at the blue-eyed assassin with his spear pointed forward. His move was obvious, he was attempting to impale the spear through Dao's back. Naturally, Dao showed no indication that he was aware of what the bandit was doing, but he was. Right when it seemed like the bandit was going to be successful in his attempt, Mercenary Dao blurred out of sight in a burst of speed, reappeared to the bandit's right side, and proceeded to catch the spear by pinching it between his left thumb and index fingers in an underhanded position. The bandit growled and did his best to try and get the spear free, but despite Dao only gripping it with 2 fingers, the spear remained unmoving. The bandit proceeded to stare into the cold, menacing blue eyes of the blonde assassin, and it was at that moment that he realized just what he had gotten into. While still holding onto the tip of the spear with only 2 fingers, he proceeded to twist his hand upside down, making sure to sweep the flat end of the spear up against the bandit's chest, and this caused him to hold the spear high up in the air, with the bandit laying horizontally on the flat end of it. Before the bandit could even make a sound, Dao pulled back on the spear for a moment, and then quickly drove the pole end of the spear forward with such speed that it pierced straight through the bandit's chest and sheared his lungs off. With a smirk on his face, he stabbed the spear into the ground and let the bandit left on that pole, suspended in the air and dying in a short amount of seconds. Unknown to Dao, he was being watched by someone in the trees, and that person in the trees liked what she saw. She grinned a toothy, sharp-toothed grin of delight over seeing just a small taste of what this mysterious new protector of Tazuna could do. She knew of Mercenary Dao, all ninja with a bounty on their heads made it a habit of learning the names of reputable bounty hunters, and she had plenty of things about him. Only hearing about him did not do him justice, it seems. She had a feeling that she was going to deeply enjoy fighting him. It had been about a week and a half since Mercenary Dao and Tazuna had entered Nami no Kuni, and things were tense in the household. Inari had grown deathly afraid of Dao and often refused to be alone with him. Although, after that violent episode Dao had with the boy, he had since gone quiet and had yet to utter another word about how the blonde-haired assassin was gonna die by Gato's hands, which was perfectly fine with Mercenary Dao. That's what he had intended to do. Make sure the boy that would never let such filthy garbage spill from his miserable lips again. Perhaps the boy even though of him being more terrifying than Gato, which would tickle Dao's fancy quite a bit. Tsunami showed thinly veiled hostility towards him, the memory of what he did to her son forever earning him a spot on her hated people list. Whether or not he ranked higher on her list than Gato remained to be seen, though, as the woman was still too terrified of him to try and do something to him. She was smarter than most, because if she did try something, he would have slain her where she stood, regardless of what Tazuna and Inari's thoughts on the matter were. So long as the woman retained her common sense and realized that messing with him was a bad idea, he would be perfectly happy to let her live. Tazuna outright loathed him, though, saying he was worse than Gato. The comment just made Dao smirk in amusement, treating it fully as a compliment. Yes, he fully believed that he was worse than Gato, and he had no issue with being seen as worse than him. He had a reputation to uphold, after all, and he wasn't the type of person to deny the fact that he was a monster. He took pride in such a thing, but he truly believed that what put him above other monsters was his sense of business. Every day, he guarded Tazuna while he did his work on the bridge, and all seemed well, but Mercenary Dao constantly had this feeling that he was being watched. His senses always picked up that someone was nearby, watching him, but he couldn't figure out who it was. The scent he was picking up smelled vaguely of rainwater, and, was that apples he smelled? It was interesting, but wholly unfamiliar to the mercenary, although he could tell that they were most certainly female. Whoever it belonged to, he knew for a fact that they were following him, and he deduced that, whoever they were observing him. They weren't really learning a whole lot, as all the times they had observed him, he hadn't really shown off anything truly unique. Whatever their reason was for observing him, though, was something that was completely unknown to him. Nevertheless, he was suspicious of this unknown person that seemed to be following him every time he was out and about. During all the times they had been following him, he had been guarding Tazuna, and he had yet to encounter a single problem so far. However, that was all about to change today. As Dao waited for everyone to go about their morning routines, he took Tazuna to the bridge to do his work. When they got there, though, they discovered that someone had butchered almost all of the workers. Tazuna went chalk white and retched over the side of the bridge at the sight of the mutilated bodies. Dao, on the other hand, barely batted an eye. Examining the corpses slowly, he raked his eyes over their forms, and took notice of the sword wounds. The wounds themselves are obvious from a blade of some kind, but there's also these curious burns so close to the wounds, Dao thought to himself as he looked over the wounds. There appeared to be burns of some kind on the wounds, but they obviously weren't fire burns. His sensitive nose twitched as it picked up the peculiar scent on each of the victims. These are electricity burns, most likely from some kind of radon-based weapon, the mercenary thought to himself once more. That was when his nose picked up that scent again, the obviously female scent that had the stench of rainwater and apples. Narrowing his eyes, he took notice of the mist that started permeating the area. HMPH, another Kirigakure ninja, I see. I wonder if it's another Shinobogatana member, he thought to himself with a smirk on his face. Suddenly, he detected movement in the mist, and whoever the movement belonged to, they were clearly heading towards Tazuna. Quickly sliding a throwing knife into his hand from his right sleeve, he threw the blade with extreme speed towards where the sound came from. In a flash, he noticed an odd squelch sound, and then heard a sound of what sounded like water splashing on the bridge floor. Ah, so it was another Mizu Bunshin, marvelous. Then there was a silence for a few moments, before it was then broken by a sultry chuckle that came from right in his ear. I finally get to cross blades with you, Mercenary Dao. How joyous, said the voice right in his ear, but considering Dao did not sense a presence behind him, he didn't bother acknowledging the person that spoke to him. Just like the scent, the voice was clearly female in nature, and it caused him to narrow his eyes. He didn't bother with the usual banter yet, not until he knew who it was that he was facing off in battle today. Suddenly, his ears picked up movement heading straight towards him. Picking up the sound of a blade slicing through the wind, coming from his right, he quickly jumped above the offending blade, and proceeding to bend his leg backwards to kick it in that direction. The result was his foot slamming into the face of the person who tried to slice him in two. As he landed, he felt the ground beneath him wet with water again, and his left eye twitched when he realized it was another Mizu Bunshin. Still, the person had yet to show herself to him, and although he could pick up her scent and move towards her at any time, he felt that he could easily handle anything this woman could throw at him. Figuring himself to be her superior in every way, he kept his arms folded behind his back and allowed her to control the flow of battle for now. He narrowed his eyes when he detected multiple presences around him. He quickly pulled a throwing knife out from his sleeve, held out the hand that contained the throwing knife, and then spun around quickly, which caused him to hack through the Mizu Bunshins with ease. The voice spoke up once more, and his annoyance spiked up, but he did not let her know that he was aware of where she was, instead preferring to play around just a tad bit. Hiding weapons inside of your sleeves, That is actually an ingenious idea. I'm impressed so far, Dao, but since my Mizu Bunshin aren't up to the task, I suppose you should meet the real deal, said the voice, and in a flash, the woman carrying the scent of rainwater and apples was in front of him, swinging a pair of blades at him. A little caught off guard by the speed, he jumped backwards just enough to avoid receiving a fatal injury by the blades. Of course, they still cut two fairly deep wounds in his stomach that started to bleed, and he felt the sting of lightning course through his body for that very short second that the blades had made contact with his flesh. Hissing in annoyance, he made sure to get out of reach of the woman's blades, and took the time to analyze her. Upon looking her over, Dao's eyebrows rose up into his hairline when he recognized that of the strongest Shinobigatana Nananishu member, that of Amayuri Ringo. S-rank Nuke Nin, wielder of the twin Kiba blades, killed more than half of the Mizukage's elite troops and wounded Yagura himself with a deep scar across the eye before fleeing Kirigakure after she was heavily wounded by said Mizukage. She was one of the most wanted criminals in the world, and she was to be his opponent? Mercenary Dao grinned at the thought of facing her in combat, and he knew immediately that he would have to give it his all. He had fought a number of ninja in his time, but this would be the first time he would cross blades with an S-rank ninja. Well, Amayuri Ringo, the strongest of the Shinobigatana Kirigakure organization. I admit, I did not expect to see you here. Let me guess, Zabuza and his masked accomplice were minions of yours. Mercenary Dao said to Amayuri in a snide manner. The swordswoman in question grinned a predatory grin at him, and nodded her head in the affirmative. After that little exchange, she lunged at Dao and attempted to bring her electrified twin blades down on top of the semi-known assassin. In response to this, Dao quickly drew his blade from its sheath, and with just one hand clutching tightly on the hilt, he clashed his curiously white blade against hers and causing sparks to fly among them. He felt some minor strain as their blades clashed, and while the Kiba wielder's strength was impressive, Dao's strength was massive due to his heavy focus on hand-to-hand combat, and because of that, he was capable of holding her back. Amayuri pressed down tightly on his curiously white blade, her shark-like teeth grinding together as she tried to slice through his blade. Something was wrong. Her Kiba blades were the sharpest blades in the entire world. They should have been able to cut through his own blade, and on top of that, he wasn't being electrocuted by the powerful lightning flowing through her blades. Genuinely curious about this, she grunted out a statement as she twisted her body around to avoid his kick, and then spun away from him. My blades should have easily cut through your sword, and you should have blasted by the electrical charges going through my blades. That sword of yours isn't a metal blade, is it? She asked him, before darting forward and then performing a clockwise spin with her sword sprayed out to her left. Dao quickly brought up his blade and blocked her blades with his own, and then sent her spinning with his exponential strength. Rather than being knocked off balance from being sent spinning, the female Shinobigatana member easily kept her footing and took advantage of the spin to try and cut into him, this time with her sword splayed out to the right. Dao was quick to defend himself by darting backwards away from the blades, and then lashed out with a punch at the left side of her cheek, which snapped her head to the side and sent her spinning backwards and away from him. How astute of you, Kirigakure garbage. This sword is a Kagaya bone sword, made out of one of the bones of the late Kagaya patriarch. And not only are Kagaya blades indestructible, they're also made of bone, and bone doesn't conduct electricity, he said in reply, blurring out of sight and reappearing behind in a burst of speed as he attempted to slash all the way down through her spine. Amayuri seemed to have realized where he disappeared to, and managed to lunge forward enough to avoid getting a crippling injury, though there was now a deep gouge going through her back that ripped the back of her shirt in two. Feeling the sting of the wound, she let out a hiss, not one of pain, but one of enjoyment, because she finally had an enjoyable opponent to fight in a long while ever since she abandoned Kirigakure. That is quite a find, Dao. Lucky you. Interested in sating my curiosity by telling me where you acquired it? She asked with a cheeky grin on her face, spinning around and using the momentum and to send her forward at her opponent. She slashed at Dao once as she spun, then stopped mid-momentum, spun the other way to slash at him again, spun back the other way to slash at him again, then repeated the cycle until she had thrown a total of more than 30 slashes in the span of a mere 3 seconds. Her spins and movements were so quick that it legitimately looked like that a miniature tornado was forming around her with every spin she performed. Dao's response to this was to quickly bring up his sword, and deflect each blow she threw at him as he skillfully glided with nimble feet across the bridge, making sure to be mindful of his surroundings so that she doesn't trap him up against a wall. While Dao most certainly had the strength to outmatch her, and incredible speed to go along with it, Amayuri was very nimble, and wasn't giving him to fully incorporate his strength behind his blows. That being said, it was clear to tell that the redhead wasn't giving it her all, and to be honest, Dao wasn't doing his absolute best, either. As the two exchanged blows with their blades, they appeared to dance across the bridge, their forms a fuzzy blur as Amayuri slowly pushed Dao around the bridge. Maybe I'll tell you as you lay dying at my feet. After all, dead women tell no tales, Dao retorted in a snide manner as the androgynous former Kirigakure Kunoichi jumped onto the guard rail of the bridge to give herself more height, and managed to perform a very acrobatic spin on the very guard rail and tried to slash at him once more while maintaining perfect balance. Dao quickly ducked underneath the slash, and then managed to strike her in the stomach with the hilt of his bone sword, before headbutting her in the chest and then sweep-kicking her off of her feet. Amayuri took the full brunt of the attacks, and if she were a lower-ranked member, then she would have normally fell back first onto the guard rail. However, she was a full-blown S-ranked ninja, and she quickly spun herself away from Dao horizontally in the air, sliding the blade in her right hand into her left and then stopping herself by performing a one-handed handstand on the guardrail with her now free hand. She then slammed down feet first onto the guardrail, slid her other sword back into her free hand, then lunged at Mercenary Dao and attempted an X-shaped cross-slash onto Zuna's bodyguard. The pink-garbed assassin quickly spun away from the attack, and jumped onto the guardrail. He then lunged at her and assaulted her with a barrage with quick, fencing thrusts of the blade, also showing incredible balance on the thin guardrail. The mistress of the silent killing technique quickly sprinted backwards as she twisted and turned her body around to avoid the thrusts of his blade, before striking him in the face with the hilt of her left kiba blade, and while it stunned him for a split second, it barely did more than that. However, that split second was all she needed, as she quickly assaulted his chest with a spinning slash of her blades. Dao managed to recover in time to avoid the attack, but unfortunately for him, she managed to cut across his left arm enough to leave profusely bleeding deep gouges in it, and he grit his teeth as the lightning on the blades coursed through him and shocked his system. Such arrogance, how manly of you, Dao. The meal grows more delicious by the second, she retorted with a shark-like grin, to which led to him growling in irritation as he jumped off of the guardrail and attempted to slash her feet off of her legs. Amayuri, though, chuckled and proceeded to jump to avoid the blade, before letting out a cry as she attempted to crash her blades down on top of him again. Dao let out an irritated tch sound and glided to the side much like water to avoid the attack she threw at him, and in a blur of speed, he appeared behind her and managed to shove his sword through her chest, which caused her to let out a rasping cough. However, when Amayuri collapsed into a puddle of water, Dao narrowed his eyes as he realized that she used the Kawarimi no Jutsu to swap out in time with a Mizu Bunshin. He didn't admit it out loud, but Amayuri so far had been the strongest opponent so far. Even against ninjas, Dao had rarely come across an opponent so fierce. He hadn't noticed any Mizu Bunshin because his focus was entirely on the S-ranked Nuke Nen. Thankfully, it seemed that she had felt that keeping her Mizu Bunshin so close to Dao wasn't a good idea, and seemed to be keeping however many she had left out of range. Waiting patiently, and ignoring the bleeding come from the wounds he had received at her so far, his nostrils flared when he picked up the scent of Amayuri behind him. Spinning quickly, he kicked her away and slashed at her with his bone sword, causing her to receive a deep cut that went down diagonally from her right shoe down to her left hip. So, that made it her 2 wounds to his 4, then. In a flash, she vanished back into the mist, this time coming to the side of him. Darting backwards quickly to avoid the downward slice, he hit her in the chin with a high kick and then spun-kicked her hard into the nearby guardrail. Trying to capitalize while he had the chance, he flung a throwing knife that he aimed directly at her skull. There was another squelch-like sound effect, and he grit his teeth in irritation when he realized that it was yet another Mizu Bunshin. So, she was back to trying the silent killing technique again, was she? This was just getting annoying for the underworld assassin, as this is the first time he had to ever really struggle. He was about fed up with this woman, and was prepared to unleash hell upon her, until he heard her speak up. Well, as much fun as this has been, my tasty meal, I've grown just a tad weary of this, and so it's time to goodbye to your earthly bonds. Ikazuki no Kiba, was what she had called out to Dao as she drew her swords together and summoning a lightning current and attempting to summon a lightning strike down upon Dao. Widening his eyes just a bit, he proceeded to dart across the bridge, barely avoiding the lightning strikes that she was summoning from the sky. Every time he avoided a lightning strike, he heard the echoing voice of the hidden Amayuri, who seemed to be able to keep track of him as he was able to keep track of her. Deciding to get creative, he let out a scream as he gathered his energy into his hand, and managed to deflect one of the bolts right back at its creator. Dao didn't get off scot-free, though, as his left hand became deeply burned by the attack. The hidden Amayuri was caught off guard by the deflection, and was struck with such force by the bolt of lightning that she slammed forcefully into the crane of the bridge, sliding down with an echoing thud as her body smoked from the power of the lightning. Letting out a cough, she staggered back to her feet, only to find that Dao was already on the approach, sprinting at his incredible speed so he could cleave her in half at the hips. Widening her eyes, she quickly placed her kiba blades into the air, and gathered her chakra. Raito Jutsu. Rakurai, she called out, summoning a bolt of lightning down onto her right when Dao was so close to hitting her. The result was the bolt of lightning chakra summoned a powerful shockwave that slammed with incredible force into Dao, and sending him skipping and sliding down the bridge. Growing more and more enraged as the fight went on, he staggered back to his feet, and quickly gathered his ki into his eyes. "Choke on your own blood, you androgynous trash. Somasen!" he shouted back at her, firing a pair of thin beams from his eyes at Amayuri's lungs. The surprise maneuver only allowed her to ensure that she didn't take any fatal damage, though the beams did pierce through the right side of her collarbone and through her right bicep due to the way she dodged, causing her to feel searing pain. The two of them panted as they glared at each other, the fatigue starting to set in just a bit. Pitch black, predatory black orbs met predatory sapphire blue orbs, a spark of intensity forming between their eyes. Neither giving an inch, daring the other to make the first move. Sooner or later, one of them had to break the stare and go on the move, or else they would be here forever. Dao was starting to feel the blood loss and the loss of feeling in parts of his body from the electrocution damage, and Amayuri was also losing quite a bit of blood. "You are the toughest meal I've ever had to work for, Dao. You've put up an admirable fight so far. It's been a long time since I've fought someone who could stand up to me. Such a shame you're going to die here and now with that bridge builder, as I'd actually like to face you again. Such a shame that your path ends here. Raiden. Sandageto," she said as she used the strength necessary to stab her swords into the metal bridge, then fired twin bolts of lightning into the sky. Before Dao could react, a powerful bolt of lightning struck the ground and sent out a massive shock wave that Dao only barely had time to bring up his arms and defend against the attack, forming a protective shell of energy around himself. There was a flash of white, and he was then consumed by the powerful technique, slamming forcefully into Tazuna and protecting him from the blast. As Amayuri panted, she waited for the blast zone to clear, and when everything cleared up, she saw Mercenary Dao slowly stagger back to his feet. He had seen better days, with his striking outfit having been destroyed and leaving him clad only in his undergarments and shoes. Quite a bit of his body had been burned, the mustache on his lip singed off, and his beautiful hair had been burned off. Slowly standing up, Dao slowly uncrossed his arms, and snarled at her, very thankful that his sword was still fine. The red-headed swordswoman, when she saw this, widened her eyes when she saw that he had managed to survive one of her strongest attacks, a thick coat of sweat rolling down her and her panting increasing. Gritting his teeth as he snarled at her, Dao proceeded to smirk evilly at her, and shakily formed his hands into the triangle formation. "You whore, you ruined my outfit, and it was custom-made. Enjoy the afterlife, Kokoho," he shouted out, forming a super powerful square-shaped wave of energy that flew at the strongest member of the Shinobigatana Nanananshu, with such speed that she only had time to form a lightning-based barrier around her body to shield her from the blast. As the explosion sounded off, and the smoke cleared, Amayuri was stuck in a similar position as Mercenary Dao was. The both of them were on their last legs, and they both fell to one knee. Yet, even though that they were nearly spent on energy, they still had enough in them to glare menacingly at each other. Slowly, ever so slowly, they staggered back to their feet, and they were about to launch themselves at each other for one final attack, before they noticed the mist that Amayuri had summoned up had dissipated. Well, look at what we have here, boys. It seems we have ourselves some bones to pick dry," a snide voice commented on the situation, which caused the 2's ranked opponents to stiffen up and look around them. What they saw made them grit their teeth, because on one side of the bridge, they had Gato and his gang of thugs, while on the other side, they had an entire Kirigakure Anbu team. Looking each other in the eye, they came to a silent understanding, and pressed their backs together, an action that caused Amayuri to hiss in pain due to the deep gouge in her back. "What's the meaning of this, Gato?" Amayuri asked with her shark-like teeth as she pulled her swords out of the ground, which caused Gato to laugh in amusement. "I had contacted the Mizukage about your location here in Nami no Kuni so I could sell you out to him and collect the bounty on both yourself and your little group of minions, and so Yagura had decided to send a full of Anbu, under the promise that I allow Kirigakure Anbu to be stationed here and fund his village. However, I had chosen to have both my men and the Kirigakure Anbu stand back and wait until the time is right, which was when either one of you died and the other was left weakened, or when both of you were too weak to put up a fight. Now, I get to get rid of both the man after my head, and collect your bounty as well," he said in reply, which caused the red-headed former Kirigakure Kunoichi to widen her eyes. As the two fighters examined their opponents, Amayuri proceeded to speak up to the man that had previously been her opponent. I think I have enough chakra left for one more jutsu in me. How about you, Meal? She asked Mercenary in between each pant she made, which caused Dao to narrow his eyes. Grab a hold of me, and when I say now, you use your strongest attack, do you understand? Dao asked her quietly with narrowed eyes, which caused Amayuri to grunt out the affirmative, and turned to wrap her arms around his neck. Deciding that his life was more important than protecting Tazuna, he took a deep breath, gathered his ki, and flew up into the air to position himself in front of the sun. After sheathing his sword, he placed his hands in front of his face. Solar flare, he shouted, as he closed his eyes, causing the sun to brighten up to inhuman levels, stunning and blinding the thugs, Gato, and the assembled Kirigakure Anbu team. Dao then quickly slammed back into the ground, and gave Amayuri the signal, which caused her to pierce the ground with her Kiba blades once more, and used her Raiden Sandageto Jutsu again, packing as much power as she could get away without killing herself from chakra exhaustion, resulting in everyone, including Tazuna, to be utterly obliterated by the attack. Once the smoke has cleared, everyone on the bridge had been vaporized, but Dao and Amayuri were nowhere to be seen, the Kiba blades she wielded having vanished along with them. There was a small house in Kawa no Kuni, a lone figure resting in a bed. The pest was peaceful, until the figure's eyes shot open, and the man known as Mercenary Dao sat straight up in bed when the sound of an alarm clock sounded in his ears. Turning off the clock, he got out of his bed, and noticed that the wounds and burns he had on his body had been healed. Looking down at himself with an eyebrow, he walked over to a mirror, and ran a hand through his hair. He frowned when he noticed that it didn't seem burned at all, and in fact seemed as good as new. Wondering what was going on, he looked down at the clothes on the desk in front of the mirror that even had a note sitting on top of it. It read as follows: Dear Dao, you and that shinobi katana girl were awfully injured when I found you both collapsed on the ground, and unconscious. While she was a sink to heal up, you were much more difficult to heal, since your lack of chakra means I wasn't able to heal up the shinobi way. Thankfully, since I became your personal physician, I had learned numerous tricks with non-chakra based surgery and such to heal you up right quick. I even managed to shave your burnt hair off and got it to regrow good as new, and I even braided your hair into that ponytail style you like so much. Of course, the areas on your upper lip where the facial grew were so hideously that, even though I healed them up well enough for there to be no legitimate health issues, you are now unable to grow hair in that area. That Amayuri girl said she would wait for you to wake up, as she appeared to have something to say to you. There's also a scroll with the seal of the K's no Kuni Daimyo on it that appeared to be for you. It's underneath the clothes. Signed, Iriohime. P.S. I made you a brand new outfit that's an exact replica of the one that you lost. Dao smirked at the message and proceeded to set it alight to prevent anyone from getting a hold of it. After stamping the embers out, he proceeded to slip his clothes on, making sure to strap his sword to his back. He didn't even bother testing to see if the measurements were right, as his personal physician had long ago memorized the measurements of his body to be able to make perfectly fitting replicas of his outfit. Once that was done, he proceeded to look down at the scroll that apparently belonged to the K's no Kuni Daimyo, and narrowed his eyes when he saw the official seal belonging to said daimyo keeping the scroll sealed. Deciding to take a look and see what was up, he removed the seal on the scroll, and opened up to look at the contents. The scroll read, Dear Mercenary Dao, I have heard through several reliable sources about your impressive mission record, your strength, and your loyalty to your employers. I have a mission for you that is of a very sensitive nature, one that can't be explained in this scroll due to fear of the message being discovered and the mission I have for you being discovered. I ask you to make your way to home with great haste, as soon as you are able to come. Suffice to say, it is something that I don't trust anyone in my court to handle, due to the fact I don't want anyone to know I was involved in it. If you come, you will be well paid, provided you are successful. Signed, the Daimyo of K's no Kuni. Mercenary Dao raised an eyebrow over the contents of the scroll, finding himself completely and utterly intrigued over this supposedly super-secret mission. However, he was very suspicious, because this could very well likely be a trap, and he was going to make sure he was prepared for that possibility. Making sure to burn the scroll and the seal of the K's no Kuni Daimyo, he proceeded to stamp out the flames once more, and then exited the small house. Immediately, he was hit with that familiar scent of rainwater and apples, and he noticed that the scent was coming from above him. Instinctively, he quickly pulled out his bone sword, and blocked the descending strike of Amayuri's electrified Kiba blades. The two struggled for dominance for a moment, before Dao pushed her back and away from him. However, rather than press the attack, Amayuri merely grinned a toothy grin at him, and deactivated the electricity in her blades before sliding them back in their sheaths. Very wary of what she had planned, Dao quickly sheathed his blade, and stared at her with narrowed eyes as he folded his arms behind his back, adopting his usual pose as he continued to glare at her. The glare on his face just widened the grin of the swordswoman with the dark red hair, and for a moment, they just stood there in silence, before she broke the silence by speaking up. "You're the first great fight I've had in a damned long time since I left Kirigakure, and I've grown curious of you. One day, I want to have a rematch with you, Neil, and I'll make sure to bury you good and proper when the match is done." Amayuri spoke up to him with that wide, sharp-toothed grin still on her face. Upon hearing this, the semi-known assassin scoffed at her in a dismissive manner, not thinking much of what she had said. While she had done a decent job of facing him in their last match, he was sure that had they not been interrupted, he would have obliterated and taken the blades, as well as the life, of a second Shinobi Katana member. "If you're so eager to die and join your little misfit Kirigakure trash minions in the afterlife, then I'd be happy to grant your wish if you ever wind up being so foolish as to seek me out again. The only reason I haven't killed you now is because I have something more important to do. So I suggest you run along and go back to running from Yagura and his Anbu like a good little nuke nin." He shot back at her before turning his back to her and walking up to a nearby tree, looking it up and down as he cupped his chin and started making calculations in his mind, trying to judge whether or not it would be good enough to use for his trip to Kei's no Kuni. There's that manly arrogance again, it's enough to make a girl weak in the knees. "If you think you're going to get rid of me that easily, though, you're gravely mistaken," Amayuri spoke back with a slightly wider grin than before. Really, the man was so lackadaisical, and attractively arrogant, oh so very deadly. She had certainly found an interesting one, and he was someone that clearly didn't even use chakra. He appeared to be using some kind of energy, without a doubt, but she knew for a fact it wasn't chakra. She had no idea who it was that trained him, but whoever they were, they did a damn good job of it. She had to give her props to whoever this mysterious trainer of his was. "Oh really? I presume you're going to be following after me, then? Would you still be able to follow me if I were cut your legs off?" he asked her in an irritated fashion without bothering to turn around and face her, which had only caused her to chuckle in amusement. While most would be angry by the arrogance and the scornful dismissing they were being dealt at the hands of Dao, Amayuri just found the arrogance, as well as the threats of violence and death, both amusing and attractive. The closest person she ever got to someone like Dao was Kisame Hoshigaki, but she would never compare Dao to that accursed fishman. One of them was a smooth, hired assassin, and the other was a bloodthirsty psychopath who betrayed Kirigakure out of his own selfishness. "I'd like to see you try that, when I've already severed your head from your neck. You're not getting rid of me that easily, Dao, because I've taken an interest in you. When I get someone in my sights, I pursue them until I get what I want, and since you have the profession you do, I assume you'll be facing enemies that share a level of power with myself. And I would hate to lose out on the chance of getting my rematch and killing you because someone already beat me to the punch." The red-headed Mizu no Kuni-born Nuke Nin retorted back at him, which just made him snort in a derisive manner, but considering that she'd pretty much said she was going to follow him and prevent others from killing him so that she could have the chance to do so herself, he felt there was no need to end her life just yet. After all, if she was going to go to the trouble of pursuing him to each end of the world he was in and ensure his survival just for a rematch, then she had her uses in his life, at least for now. That might change later on, but for now, he supposed there was no harm in letting her follow him. Judging by her personality, she wasn't the type to kill him while he was asleep. She wanted him to be wide awake, and at full power and health just for the pleasure of proving herself is better. That line of thinking reminded him perfect of himself, and for that, he had to admit, she had earned some of his respect. He certainly wouldn't let her know that, though. HMPH, well then, if you're going to ensure that I live just to have the pleasure of trying to kill me yourself, I suppose I should allow you to follow me. Just don't slow me down, or I'll enjoy ending your miserable little life. he replied back to her, once again not even bothering to face her as he proceeded to kick the tree at the very base of its trunk, which led to a clean, precise cut all the way through the base of the tree. As the tree fell, Dao proceeded to catch the tree, and held it above his head. Says the one that seemed to be struggling to keep up with me in our fight. After all, I believe I cut you more times than I cut you, she retorted back as she traced her tongue over her lips, growing more intrigued by the man the more he let his arrogance show, and that little show of precision and strength he showcased by both making a clean cut through a tree, and then holding it above his head, was just too good for her to ignore. Noticing the adjustments he was making, as well as the intense focus, she tilted her head to the side in curiosity. "What are you doing?" she asked him in a curious tone of voice. Without turning to her acknowledge her, he replied back, "Stand on this pillar and stick to it with your chakra. The trip we're taking shouldn't take long, so you shouldn't take long," was all he said to her, which just made the redhead shrug and jump onto the tree, curious and eager to see what it was he was going to do. In a flash, he started muttering calculations under his head, and adjusting the way he was holding the tree trunk every so often. Eventually, he nodded his head, and spoke up to her once more. "Try not to fall off, or else you might splatter all over the ground, weakling," he said in a mocking manner, before he proceeded to launch the pillar like a missile into the sky, jumping on it before it got too far away, and stood on top of it with his feet pressed tightly together, keeping his arms folded behind his back as he proceeded to surf the pillar. He was also ignoring the surprised shouts that Amayuri made. The massive tree cruised through the sky at a high rate of speeds, and Amayuri had actually clutched onto him from the shock of what was happening, which had caused Mercenary Dao to scowl in irritation, but he did not push her away as he figured the shock would pass. Even over the course of the roaring winds, he could hear the heavy breathing of Amayuri, feel her hot breath tickling his neck and sending sensations down his spine. Naturally, he ignored all of that and kept his eyes focused straight ahead, watching the scenery just fly by them. Eventually, just as he predicted, Amayuri calmed down, and let go of him, though he could still hear her heavy breathing. Eventually, that breathing of hers calmed down, and she eventually spoke up, the tone in her voice letting him know she wanted to know what the hell just happened. "What the hell did you just do?" she asked him in a baffled manner, which had caused Dao, whose back was still turned to her and had yet to look in her direction, to smirk in amusement. Yet again, he manages to shock someone with one of his many abilities. It just further reinforced his superiority to those around him, and it never failed to stroke his ego a bit. "I calculated the amount of strength I would need to pack into my throw judging by wind direction, wind speed, weight of what I held, the distance from here to the Kei's no Kuni daimyo's palace, and other such calculations I would need to figure out in order to throw this far enough to be able to surf it to my destination. This allows me to massively cut down the time I need to get somewhere. It may not be teleportation, but it's far faster than running the whole way. Any other questions, frightened little girl?" he explained to her in a snarky manner. Amayuri scowled at him in irritation for his calling her what he did. She wasn't frightened, or a little girl, either, she was just surprised by what he had done. The fact that he can make calculations that exact, and possess such strength, caught her off guard, as she had never heard of such a thing. She had to admit to herself that she was impressed once again by what this blonde-haired assassin could do. It seemed that he was a man of many talents, and his method of getting around was both flashy and very much show-off-like, but it was also impressive and fast. She could probably move faster if she used the Shunshin no Jutsu, but that wasn't nearly as interesting as this tree surfing method of getting around. "I wasn't scared, you pony-tailed asshole. I was just surprised by what you did, because I haven't seen such a thing before. I know I certainly can't do it," she said, grinding her sharp teeth together as she bitterly retorted back at him, which just caused him to scoff. Of course she couldn't do it, because it was no doubt to him that, although she was a smart and strong fighter, he doubted heavily that she could match his intellect in other areas. However, rather than voice his thoughts on the matter, he allowed the both of them to fall into silence, and Amayuri had quickly forgotten about her anger, and just enjoyed the way they were traveling. Time skip. In a flash, far sooner than Amayuri expected, they had entered Kei's no Kuni, and the daimyo's palace was visible off in the horizon. She had been enjoying the sights pass them by, the wind in her face, her hair blowing in the wind, and everything. The Shunshin was more boring, if only because any halfway decent ninja knew it, and while she would still prefer the Shunshin, she would get used to this method of traveling if she was going to be following Mercenary Dao around. She wasn't going to let him get away from him, not when there were plenty of opponents that could potentially kill him and thus deny her of a rematch. When I say so, cancel the flow of your chakra in your feet and jump straight up, he said to her, which caused her to nod her head. When they reached the front gates of the daimyo's palace, Dao proceeded to stamp his feet on the tree and angled it downwards. Right before the tree slammed into the ground, Dao gave Amayuri the signal, and they jumped up into the air. When the tree spiked itself into the ground, they landed feet first gracefully on the trunk of the tree, and they both observed the guards at the front gates staring at them with widened eyes and dropped jaws. Hesitantly, one of the samurai pulled out his sword and pointed it at them, nervously looking at Amayuri's slashed kirigakure headband. "Why have you come to our daimyo's palace?" the samurai asked, nervous. Dao proceeded to narrow his eyes at the samurai, and turned to Amayuri for a moment, telling her with his eyes to let him do the talking. Deciding that he knew what he was doing, the redhead nodded her head, and decided to stay quiet for now. Seeing that he got a confirmation from her, the mercenary turned back to the samurai and spoke up. "My name is Mercenary Dao, and I received a letter from the daimyo asking for my presence," was what the blonde-haired, ponytailed assassin had said to the samurai, which had caused the guard's eyes to light up in recognition when he said who he was. Seeing the recognition in his eyes, Dao smirked in a pleased manner when he realized that the guards had already been informed of his arrival. "Ah, yes, the K's no Kuni daimyo told us to expect you, and who to look for. You may go in, but not your companion," the samurai said, pointing his blade at the S-rank Kirigakure Nuke Nin, which caused Dao to look at him with a raised eyebrow. "I promise you that she won't be an issue. If she causes trouble, I'll put her down myself," he said with a shrug of his shoulders, practically feeling the amused grin on the face of Amayuri. He didn't need to see it, he could practically feel it on her face. The two samurai looked at each other for a moment, holding a conversation between them that Dao and Amayuri weren't privy to. Finally, after some deliberation, the two samurai nodded their heads, and spoke up to let them know what their decision was. "You may come in, and we will inform the daimyo of your companion." "Wait here," said one of the guards as the other entered the palace to tell the daimyo that Dao arrived, albeit with an unusual companion in tow. The two S-ranked warriors waited patiently for the messenger to come back, and luckily for them, that they didn't have to wait long. The samurai came back, and with a bow of his head, he informed them that they were allowed to enter, which had caused Dao and Amayuri to jump off of the pillar, landing feet first on the ground beneath them and entering the palace. One of the servants in attendance quickly led them to the throne room, where the daimyo was waiting. Once they arrived, the two proceeded to bow their heads respectfully to the rather large daimyo, and they both honed in on the sight of two cloaked individuals in the room with them. They turned to the daimyo that was sitting there, and waited for him to speak up. After all, it was polite for the daimyo to speak up first before speaking to him. Though they both may considering themselves superior to the civilian ruler of the countries, that doesn't mean they were going to be foolish enough to earn their ire. "Ah, I am pleased to see you at last, Mercenary Dao, and I see you've brought an S-ranked Nuke Nin with you. My guard has assured me that if she gets out of hand, you'll deal with her, so I see no issue in having her stay. Allow me to get right down to the chase. I have a mission for you that is in 2 parts. There are 7 targets in total. One of my servants shall hand the information over to you now," said the K's no Kuni daimyo as he clapped his hands together twice, which caused a servant standing by the throne to approach Dao and hand over some dossiers on his targets. Dao took them into his hands, and proceeded to look through the targets listed. As he examined the dossiers, he noticed that all of them were Sanagakure shinobi and kunoichi of varying ages. 6 out of the 10 were fuinjutsu masters, or apprentices to those masters, and the last 4 were the Yondaime Kasuke's children and their joint sensei. Dao's eyebrows lifted up into his hairline in surprise. One of them was even the legendary Chiyo, a prominent name from the Second Shinobi War. While it was clear that he would be paid triple the price he would never get for each kill he made, why would the Wind Daimyo want all of these people dead? Amayuri, upon seeing his reaction, read through what he was reading, and she adopted a similar surprised expression herself. However, rather than saying anything, she opted to stay silent and let Dao do the talking, since this was his mission, after all. While I can easily wipe these cretins out completely with very little effort on my part, why do you desire me to kill them, daimyo-sama? He asked him with a curious tilt of his head, which caused the daimyo to nod his head in understanding, since he knew it was unusual for a daimyo to want to wipe members of his own shinobi force. As you know, it's not exactly a secret that I've been cutting Sanagakure's funding and sending plenty missions meant for them over to Konohagakure instead. I've decided that having to deal with Sanagakure is just too much of a hassle, and I want to get rid of the village. Unfortunately, if I destroyed it with my own forces, so what I want to do is make it look like a complete accident, the daimyo explained to Dao and Amayuri, which caused the two to widen their eyes just a bit. They were both aware that this daimyo had a reputation of being a stupid fool, but the fact that he actually wanted to wipe one arm of his entire military force just showed how utterly stupid he is. He seemed to have no idea just what kind of power vacuum this would create. Amayuri was about to speak up and inform the daimyo of how foolish he was being, but Dao held his hand up in a stop signal over his shoulder for Amayuri to see, and then proceeded to speak up the daimyo. Let me guess, you want me to wipe out the seal masters and their apprentices, and then wipe out the team made up of the Yondaime Casecage's children and their sensei so that the Ichibi will reform in the desert. It will go on an unstoppable rampage that will lead to the destruction of Sanagakure no Sato, am I correct? Dao asked the daimyo, who proceeded to nod his head in confirmation, utterly impressed that the assassin managed to figure out his plan. Amayuri, who stayed silent for the most part, spoke up to ask the daimyo about a small flaw in his plan. Daimyo-sama, what happens if one of the other villages sends seal masters of their own to try and seal the Biju for themselves and prevent the destruction of Suna? Amayuri asked the utterly and abysmally foolish daimyo, who just smirked at her in an unconcerned manner, and spoke up to her. Let's just say I have contacts who will ensure they are unable to interfere. Only kill the seal masters and their apprentices, leave the sensei and the children alive, as you should kill them when the Chunin exams in Konohagakure comes around. I have information from the Casecage about something that will happen there, and that will be the best time to kill them. So, will you take the job? The daimyo asked Dao, who proceeded to stroke his chin in thought. He didn't really care if completing the job caused a war or anything like that, because he could just profit from it, and if he did this, he would get a rather good bounty as well. He cared nothing for all of the innocent lives that would be lost, nor of the power vacuum that this would create. After thinking about it for a moment, he eventually nodded his head and bowed to the daimyo. Consider this mission already complete, daimyo-sama. I assume you have a plan that will allow me to get access to the seal masters and their apprentices? Mercenary Dao asked the daimyo with a smirk on his face. Amayuri was surprised that Dao would take the job, but if it gave her a chance to assist Dao in his mission, as well as a chance to cause a little bit of chaos. The mere thought of that caused her to smirk in excitement, and her blood was boiling with the thought of what she was going to get to do. Cracking her neck eagerly, she waited to hear what this plan was. I have another person that will be a part of this mission that works for a secret organization, and he happens to be an explosives expert. When the first explosion triggers inside of the village, that will let you know when to begin your attack. Once the last of the sealing team are dead, retreat and get away as fast you can. Do you understand, Mercenary Dao? The daimyo asked, which caused both of the S-ranked fighters to nod their heads. Smirking in a pleased manner, the daimyo dismissed them, and with a bow, the two turned their backs and proceeded to leave the palace. Unknowing to them, the very minute they turned their backs, the Kase no Kuni's eyes went blank and momentarily flashed with the image of a three-tomoed Sharingan, before disappearing entirely. As soon as Mercenary Dao and Amayuri left the palace of the daimyo, they noticed that it was close to sunset at this point. Before they could get far from the palace, they were stopped by the servant who handed Dao the dossiers earlier during the meeting with Kase no Kuni daimyo, who informed them that the attack would take place in just 3 days, and were told to go out of the city and go to a particular set of coordinates where the explosives expert would be waiting for them. The two assassins nodded their heads in understanding, and Dao turned on his heel and walked into Kase no Kuni's capital. Amayuri, upon seeing him leave, quickly followed after him, look at the sights with an excited grin. She had been in many places in her career as a ninja, but she had never been in capital city of Kase no Kuni. It was interesting, but it looked a little too much like Sanagakure for her taste, and the heat of the desert was still very much prominent. Having grown up in a much colder climate, the temperature was affecting her quite a fair bit. Mercenary Dao, on the other hand, seemed remarkably nonplussed about the temperature. He moved with a purpose, forcefully pushing people out of his way every time someone got too close to him. Every single time he did this, the people around him would give him a scathing look for his rudeness, but they ultimately did nothing about it, since fighting in the city was against the law. He cared not a single bit who it was he pushed out of the way, or how forcefully he did it, because in his mind, he was above everyone around him right now. He thought they were utterly insignificant, and thus he felt they should make way for him. Besides, what were they gonna do about it? Attack him? Should they do so, he would be more than happy to put them in their miserable sand-rat places. Amayuri, upon seeing this, quirked her lips up in amusement. While most people would be turned off by the arrogance Dao was displaying, the redhead just found it utterly attractive. Mercenary Dao was a true man in her eyes, arrogant, good-looking, ruthless, violent, cold, powerful, skilled, bloodthirsty, and good with the threats. He was attractive without being a pretty boy, and while most would find the sneer that was usually on his face to be incredibly unappealing, but that just added a malicious seriousness to his face, something that she looked. He was just so composed, haughty, and unlike those annoying hotshot, cocky genin, he had the skill and the power to back it up. Plus, the fact that he wasn't actually a ninja, and yet possessed such power, added a uniqueness to him that just so very appealing. However, there was just something about him that seemed so familiar, as if he had seen his face somewhere before. This was the first time she had met him. She would remember him if she had, but rather there was something about his appearance that's so familiar. Unable to resist, she squinted her coal-black eyes as she examined him to the best of her ability, trying to figure out where she had seen his face before. The sun-kissed blonde hair, the sapphire blue eyes, she knew for a fact that she had seen those specific features before. Eventually, she shrugged and decided that she would figure it out later, as she noticed Dao move his head to the side just enough for her to see that he turned his eyesight to her, though he kept his body facing forward. "Is there any particular reason you're staring at me, woman?" he asked her in an irritated manner, which just caused Amayuri to grin at him in amusement. She liked that she was capable of getting under his skin, as it meant that she had some manner of effect on him. She had a feeling that if it were someone else, it wouldn't affect him that much. Even if he found her annoying, he was just going to have put up with it, and besides, it was his fault for allowing her to stick by him and follow him in the first place. So, if he found her annoying, he had no one else but himself to blame, anyway. As soon as Dao saw the grin, his eyes narrowed a bit in irritation, which just visibly increased her amusement over the situation. "Maybe I'm contemplating on stabbing you in the back with my kiba blade and electrocuting your insides, Dao. Or maybe I'm just taking in the cute little phrase you have on the back of your outfit," she said in a snarky manner, shooting him and challenging him. Dao's left eyebrow twitched as his irritation increased just a bit. This woman had an ability to push his buttons in a way very few others had the ability to. He could kill her if he wanted to get rid of her, but she was useful to have around, since she wanted to make sure that no one managed to kill him. That was the only reason he had chosen to leave her alive, because if it wasn't for that, she would be dead and sealed up in a scroll, ready to cash in her bounty. He could tell that he was going to have to learn some patience if he was going to have put up with her for however long she decided she was going to be sticking with him for. A small, infinitesimally small, part of him actually enjoyed the banter, if he was honest with himself, but he just found her annoying for the most part. Don't get him wrong, she was going to be very useful, but it almost wasn't worth having her around if she wished to put his buttons like she was doing. Pulling one of the arms he had folded behind his back up to his face, he pinched the bridge of his nose, and although it calmed him down just a tad bit, it wasn't enough to stop him from piping back with a quip of his own. "I'm not surprised in the slightest that you would contemplate such a thing. After all, we both know you couldn't defeat me if you were to attack me in my line of sight. What I am surprised by, though, is that you possess the ability to read what's on my back. Judging by your intelligence, I would have thought it was because your reading comprehension skills are as poor as a monkey's. It's not enough you look like one, you have to have the intelligence of one, too, just for the total package." He shot back at her before turning back to face where he was going. Amayuri's lips quirked upwards just that ever bit wider. Oh, he was good, he was very good when it came to the trash talk, that was for sure. Just one more good point about him, of that there was no doubt. She was really enjoying herself with the pink-garbed mercenary, far more than she had enjoyed. Well, anything, really. The man was not only an excellent fighter, he was just as good with the verbal spars. So this was a man who could not only talk the talk, but also walk the walk. Hell, he could even do both at the same time. She found that out in their fight. He was a man of many talents, it seems, but she wondered just how far those talents extended to. Unable to help herself, she let out an amused giggle over the thought she had, which caused Dao to turn back to look at her with an annoyed glance for a moment, before he turned away once more. The two continued on their path in silence, and it was at that moment that Amayuri's stomach had decided to speak up and let her know that it was time to eat. Obtaining slight blush on her cheeks in embarrassment due to how loud it sounded, she saw Dao stop in his tracks and turn to look at her. It was very apparent to the two of them that he knew that the sound came from her. His lips twitched upwards into an amused smirk, taking particular enjoyment out of her embarrassment, which caused her to glare harder at him. Now, it was his turn to laugh, chuckling a bit to himself before he turned back around, but not before speaking up to her. "Pick out one of the places you wish to eat it, and make it fast before I decide to let you starve," he said to her as he turned his head away from her. Amayuri quirked an eyebrow up in surprise, wondering where the sudden kindness came from. He was actually offering her to choose where they ate, huh? Considering how he had been acting so far, she had assumed that he wouldn't have bothered and just let her find her own food. The fact that he was actually offering to let her choose where they would eat just let her know that he didn't find her as annoying as he claimed to. Unable to help herself, she teased him by wrapping her arms around his torso and snuggling up against him, pressing her body up against his back. "Ah, what a gentleman, Dao, and they said chivalry is dead," she teased with a chuckle as she separated from him. In response, he kept his face stone cold and rigid so that he gave nothing away, and responded back to her, his eyes narrowing at her. It seemed like he was about to do something particularly vicious to her, but what happened in reality was far from the case. Instead of reacting physically, he simply turned his nose up at her and turned back away from her. Really, the thought of Mercenary Dao being a gentleman was a laughable notion in his eyes, so much so he actually let out a scoff. However, he didn't say anything in response, preferring that he just get on with things. He didn't care that she was hungry, not in the sense that he cared for her well-being, at least. Rather, he was doing it because he would have to listen to that stomach of hers growl and growl and growl, and he wouldn't be able to not hear it because of his enhanced senses. He loved those incredible senses of his dearly, but they could sometimes be a pain, a huge pain, and this was one of those moments. There were just some things that you couldn't block out of your head, no matter how much you might really want to. Having to listen to the stomach of his annoying Tagger-on growl over and over again would just drive him crazy, so he'd rather get it taken care of now. He cared nothing for her well-being in the slightest, no matter how much that small spark inside of him enjoyed that closeness of their forms pressed together. He just wanted her to be in tip-top notch to better prove herself useful to him and have her act as a potential shield against those that might put him in the position of being killed. Though he personally believed that such a thing wouldn't happen, it was always nice to be prepared just in the event that he actually got himself put into such a position. After all, it is always better to have something and not need it, than to need it and not have it. His thoughts were then immediately broken by Amayuri sprinting past him and heading towards a small stand that made rice balls. Judging by the expression on her face, it was clear that she loved rice balls. Huh, go figure. He had gotten the impression that she would have chosen something other than something as simple as rice balls. Well, at the very least it was good to know that she didn't have expensive tastes when it came to food. He would have hated to spend money on ridiculously expensive foods and the like. Considering what he had learned of her so far, he would have figured she would have gone for something super expensive just to annoy him. Thankfully, it seemed he had pegged her just a tad bit wrongly. So, she was only slightly less annoying than he had originally thought her to be. After staring for a moment, he walked up to the stand, and watched as Amayuri eagerly dug into the rice balls she ordered with extreme gusto. The old lady at the stands was a little unnerved by the two people at her stand, the redhead with her shark-like teeth, and the blonde with the symbol of the word kill on the front of his outfit, but she seemed to be finding amusement in the energetic way that the red-headed one ate her rice balls with gusto. It was clear by the way the blonde-haired young man walked up to them that he appeared to know the redhead, and she started looking between the two of them. Amayuri was too busy eating her rice balls to notice, but Dao had most certainly taken notice of it, and he narrowed his eyes. He noticed the gears in the old lady's head turning, and he wasn't sure he liked what it was he might be thinking up. However, before he could find out what it is that she was thinking up, his red-headed companion finished up her rice balls, and wiped her face off with a napkin. She looked at the prices of the rice balls, and once she saw the prices, she looked at a particularly irritable-looking Dao. Why was he irritable, one might ask? It has to do with the fact that he could tell she wanted him to pay for her. Honestly, doesn't this woman have money of her own? Even if he had plenty of money to spare, and he did, it didn't mean he liked spending it when he didn't absolutely need to. This woman better start pulling her own weight one day, or he was going to put her heavily in debt. Although he didn't say anything, he let out a grunt, and slid his wallet out of the inside pocket of his outfit, and pulled out however much he needed to pay. The old lady smiled, and proceeded to take the money from Dao, placing it in the small register. Once that was done, she proceeded to hand him his receipt, which he took with a scowl and slid it into his wallet, before placing the wallet back into the inside pocket. With that said and done, he folded his arms behind his back once more, and started walking away with Amayuri at his side. Once they walked away from the stand, Mercenary Dao led the red-headed swordswoman to a hotel room, where he purchased a room to stay in for 3 days, seeing as the sun had gone down during her little eating feast. One of the many modifications to his body was that he could still keep himself healthy and fit with a lot less nutrients than that of other humans. It may not have much use for battle, but it made sure he didn't spend as much money, and allowed him to perform his tasks for longer periods at the time. As the two reached their room, they quickly changed into their night clothes, and proceeded to slide into the bed. Naturally, both of them were unconcerned with the presence of each other in bed with them. Dao? Amayuri muttered into her pillow, but that didn't make it any harder for the mercenary to hear her. As he laid there with his eyes closed, he mentally debated with himself if he should even bother responding to her. His annoyance spiked up a bit, because he was under the impression she was going to try and start another argument with him, when they were both trying to rest. So, he really didn't want to answer her at the moment, but he steeled himself for whatever it was that she had to say. Once he had properly prepared himself for whatever it is she felt she had to say to him, he spoke up and responded to her. "What is it?" he asked her in a quiet tone of voice, trying to get the mandatory few hours of sleep that he needed to keep himself in top physical condition. Plus, he needed to give his mind time to absorb the rather unusual manner he had been acting with her for those few hours before they entered their hotel room. He didn't want to waste any time he was resting by having another potentially irksome verbal sparring match with the red-headed former Kiri Nin, but his curiosity over what it was that she had wanted to say had gotten the better of him, and so it was with a resigned sigh that he had actually replied to her, almost as if it was in defeat. "Thanks for paying for me at the stand," she muttered, before she started to doze off, almost missing his response to her thanks, almost being the key words. Upon hearing what it was that she had to say, Dao, who was laying down and facing the opposite direction that Amayuri was, widened his eyes. The fact that she was actually thanking him surprised him, because from their interactions so far, she seemed like she was just going to rile him up and not even bother showing any gratitude or anything when he did something that might benefit her or impress her at all. Well, he supposed that there were times when even he could be wrong. "You're welcome," he said in response to her thanks hesitantly, before the two of them allowed comfortable, content silence to encompass the room, their conversation now over. Eventually, the silence of the room, as well as the soothing sound of the air conditioning blowing through the room, allowed them to fully relax, and in a flash, they had allowed sleep to take them over. Before they even knew it, they had fallen into a blissful sleep, for however long they were going to sleep for, anyway. A few hours later, when the mandatory few hours that he absolutely needed to get had passed him by, Mercenary Dao opened his eyes, and right as he started to move to get out of bed so he could go visit a bar and get himself a glass of the strongest alcohol that he could find, he immediately felt something wrapped around him. Narrowing his eyes, he turned to his side, to find that Amayuri had moved in her sleep, wrapped her arms around him, and proceeded to snuggle and cuddle with him like he was a stuffed animal. While, initially, there was a part of him that enjoyed the closeness of their bodies, he forcibly killed that spark of feeling inside of him, and slowly managed to pry Amayuri without waking her up. Once he had managed to get her off of him, Dao slid out of the bed as quickly, and yet as quietly, as he could get away with it. As the ponytailed sword for hire started heading for the door, he noticed out of the corner of his eye that Amayuri had curled herself up against his pillow and was now wrapping her arms it around, snuggling and cuddling it like she had been doing with him. So she was just one of those affectionate sleepers that liked to snuggle with someone as they rested their body and mind. Knowing that there would be moments where he would have to put up with that, he sighed in an irritated fashion and pinched the bridge of his nose for a moment. He then quickly left the room after the door as quietly as he could and then closing it behind, again as quietly as he could, and then went off to find himself a bar to have a drink. 3 days later. 3 days had passed after that moment, and it was quite clear to the both of them that something had changed between them. There was something that had just sparked between them, and neither of them were aware of what it was. They still argued, that was for a fact, but Dao seemed just a tad bit less annoyed at Amayuri's presence. She still started verbal sparring matches with him very often, if he were being honest, but he didn't find it nearly as annoying as he did before those private moments between each other. That didn't mean he stopped responding to her whenever she felt that she needed to cause an argument with him every moment she got. Neither of them were aware of the reason why they always so snippy with each other, as the both of them were still rather new to such a thing, but they would be lying if they didn't find it just a little entertaining. Ready start the mission they had been assigned. They quickly sprinted out to the coordinates that they were given that their partner would be ready to begin their assignment in Sanagakure. Mercenary Dao and Amayuri had to admit, they were curious as to who this demolitions expert happened to be, and what organization they were a part of, if they actually managed to earn the eye of the daimyo to such a point that the daimyo himself felt that this person could be trusted with the whole plan to destroy Sanagakure thing. Then again, there was always the possibility that this demolitions expert had no idea that the daimyo was planning that was always a distinct possibility. Whatever the case may be, it didn't matter to Dao. The only thing he cared about was taking pleasure in the many kills he would be dishing out, and then getting from the murders. He enjoyed the act of killing as much as he enjoyed getting paid for doing it, after all, that particular thought in his mind causing a dark smirk to appear on his face. Amayuri took notice of the expression on his face, and detecting the bloodlust, she adopted a smirk of her own, and thought of all the carnage that would be spread from their actions. Sure, there was always the chance that this plan would result in another great shinobi war. She long ago stopped caring about wars between villages, when she had abandoned her own village because the Kirigakure civil war. As the two raced through the sand dunes, they soon came upon the sight of a large, brown bird of sorts, with a person sitting on it, whose face was obscured by the straw hat and high-collared black cloak with red cloud pattern on it. The two travelers raised their eyebrows at the odd sight, recognizing that this person must be the mysterious explosives expert that was going to be helping them out in this mission of theirs. Narrowing his eyes in thought, he attempted to analyze the little features of the shadowed figure, and the most he was able to get was that the man was a blonde of some kind, and that he could make out a slashed Iwagakure Hite tied to his forehead. Other than that, he was unable to find out anything else about him. However, he picked up something else about the blonde via his scent, and he could detect that, not only did this scent belong to a male, there was also the distinct smell of clay on him. Clay? Why does that sound familiar? Mercenary Dao thought to himself with narrowed eyes, taking in the scent of the other blonde deeper into his nostrils, and that was when he detected the scent of smoke, most likely from fires that he was around. That only just caused more alarm bells to start ringing in his mind. There was this nagging feeling in the back of his mind that he knew who this explosives expert was, but for the life, he couldn't figure out. It was then that it clicked in his mind, slashed Iwagakure Hite 8, clay, explosives expert, the scent of smoke. This man had to be none other than. So, who in the hell are you, if I may ask? Came the voice of Amayuri, her curiosity getting the better of her as she examined the person's form top to bottom, and then back up, and much like Dao, she took notice of the blonde hair and the slashed Iwagakure Hite 8. Considering that Iwagakure, much like Kumogakure, had a tendency to vigorously hunt down their nuke nin and murder them for their betrayals, this one particular nuke nin would have to either be extremely powerful, or extremely good at covertly moving around. She assumed it had to be the first one, but chances are, an explosives expert isn't really all that sneaky. The only ones who were that she could think of were ninja from the now destroyed Keijirugakure that used to exist in Yama no Kumi before it was now destroyed sometime during its miniature war with Konohagakure. The blonde-haired figure smirked underneath his cloak, and started chuckling. Those chuckles then turned into slightly mad, overjoyed cackling. So, they were finally here, huh? Finally, now he had a chance to introduce more uncultured fools to his ultimate form of art, and convert to his manner of thinking. Well, to be more accurate, they would be converted right in their last fleeting moments before they were vaporized from his beautiful art. When the S-ranked Kirigakure Nuke Nen asked who he was, he reached up to grab a hold of the rim of his straw hat, and very slowly pulled it off of his so he could reveal who he was to his two partners for this mission. Once the hat had been pulled off of the man's head, Mercenary Dao and Amayuri had two entirely different reactions to whose face they saw. While their reactions were completely different, they were both still very shocked and surprised upon seeing none other than Deidara, the infamous Iwagakure mad bomber that held his village's prized Bakuten Kekkei Genkei. The fact that there was a second S-ranked Nuke Nin around, and one that was supposed to be more than a little crazy, due to his reputation of seeing his explosions as art, with the second S-ranked Nuke Nin being a member of some apparent secretive organization, meant that this plan of the K's no Kuni's daimyo was just a tad bit bigger than they had anticipated. Mercenary Dao, upon seeing who it was, grimaced when he realized that his train of thought was correct. Great, just great, he had found another S-ranked Nuke Nin, and due to this mission he was going on, he couldn't just kill the former Iwa Nin and collect his bounty. On top of that, the fact that this man was not only a former Iwa Nin, but also used to be Ryotenbin no Onoki's most highly favored ninja, meant that there was a very real chance that when Deidara took the time to really analyze the blonde mercenary's appearance. If he did, it wouldn't be long until the man came to the conclusion that Dao was related to the Yondaime Hokage, a person that Iwagakure regarded as being a demon hiding under the guise of a human. Amayuri, on the other hand, widened her eyes a bit in shock and amazement, her mouth dropping open just the smallest bit as she titled her head to the side. There had to be some kind of joke going on here, some prank being played on her. Who in the hell would recruit Deidara into a secret organization? While she could say with certainty that Deidara was worthy of his S-ranked Nuke Nin status, he was both unstable and completely nuts, and she was wondering what organization in their right mind would actually consider the Bakuten wielder worthy of joining their ranks. What kind of an organization was it? An organization filled with nutcases just like him, a gathering of psychos. Deidara, upon seeing their expressions, allowed a few chuckles to escape his lips, before he then turned serious on them. He had originally been apprehensive about the Akatsuki uniform when it came to traveling, because he happened to enjoy the reactions he got when people saw who he was right away. However, he had actually grown to enjoy the reactions people had when he revealed his identity to those around him, as it added onto the fear someone would express when they saw it was him. The fact that these two were his allies didn't change the fact that the reactions were still humorous to him. After he got his chuckling out of the way, he nodded his head and turned serious. Alright, hop onto the bird, and we'll begin our attack now, We're about to show those uncultured losers of Sanagakure that the truest form of art is fleeting, to be viewed for only a second in a magnificent spectacle, and then have everything disappear in one giant, glorious boom. He said to them with a manic, excited grin on his face, which had caused Dao to grimace in an irritated manner over having to put with a crazy Iwa Nin, while Amayuri had just chuckled in amusement over the crazy terrorist's exuberance, but they both did as Deidara had said, and jumped onto the clay bird. When they had done so, Deidara nodded his head, and made the clay bird take off. The three powerhouses glided through the air, heading to Sanagakure at a speed that Dao was actually somewhat impressed by. He would have preferred cruising on a pillar, or a tree, or some other column-like object, but that was just him. Besides, by sticking with Deidara, the two partners would be able to enter the village easier while the blonde Nuke Nin was busy bombing it from above. Besides, this also helped them as far as the assassination attempts went for a number of reasons. The first being that, according to the folder of information Dao had been given, that the team made up of the Cage's children had bent out on a B-ranked mission on the day they had arrived, and weren't expected to be back for another 2 days. The second reason was that, according to Sanagakure protocol, when the village was in danger, the Fuinjutsu masters and their apprentices were placed in an underground bunker that they knew the entrance to that lead far outside of Sanagakure that they would be let into with the help of sleeper agent that the files Dao had been handed that said the organization Deidara was a part of had, and weren't supposed to come out unless they were absolutely needed. Since they had special fuinjutsu placed on the clothes of the fuinjutsu team, they would instantly be reverse summoned to that bunker the very minute the attack started. That would be something that would be very useful, though Amayuri would be just a tad bit limited due to the location being underground, which meant that she would be incapable of using most of her Kiba blades-based jutsus, though that wasn't really much of a loss as Amayuri was still exceptionally deadly without them, and Dao would be very limited in terms of he could use as far as techniques could. After all, if he used his more destructive techniques, he could very well wind up collapsing the bunker down upon them and kill everyone, including himself and Amayuri. Though, this was a two-way street, as it also meant the fuinjutsu team would be limited in what they would be able to use against them as well. The most important thing is that the Case Cage Rasa would be too busy trying to take out Deidara to be able to come to the rescue of the fuinjutsu team. While Mercenary Dao and Amayuri were sure they could take out the Case Cage if he had actually come to help the fuinjutsu team, killing him would earn them even more infamy than killing off Sanagakure's entire fuinjutsu team. With these things in mind, Dao waited calmly for the trip to be over so that they could begin their plan of attack. The red-headed swordswoman was in the same boat, laying back against the bird with her hands behind her head, crossing one leg over the other and swinging it a bit while they both waited for Deidara's signal to let them know when it was time for the attack to begin. Thankfully, they wouldn't have to wait long, because it only took another 30 minutes before the image of Sanagakure came into sight. Deidara grinned when he saw the village come into sight, and proceeded to turn to the two behind him to let them know that it was nearly time for them to begin their mission. As he did so, he made sure to prepare some of his beautiful clay sculptures in his hands, and when he figured he had enough to deal enough damage to draw Rasa out, he spoke up to let the two traveling with him the situation. "Alright you two, the show is about to begin. Try not to be vaporized by my glorious masterpieces, lest you go down in everyone's memory for the rest of your existence as they revel in the beauty of your demise," he said in an excited tone of voice, which caused Amayuri and Dao to stand up. Right when the clay bird flew over the village, Deidara proceeded to unleash his clay masterpieces, and grinned excitedly when he formed the hand seal necessary to detonate them, causing his canvases to become splattered with glorious painted that resulted in an explosive creation of several masterpieces. Explosions rang throughout the village, and with that, chaos ensued. Mercenary Dao and Amayuri took advantage of the chaos and jumped off the clay bird, and landed on the main street of Sanagakure. Using their incredible speed, they quickly headed to the entrance of the underground bunker where the fuinjutsu team should be while Deidara proceeded to unleash chaos in the only way he knew how, through the beauty that was that of explosions. In the bunker, the three young sealing apprentices cried in fear as they hugged their masters, Chiyo, Ebizo, and Pakura of the Shikuden, protectively around their waists fearfully. The three veteran ninja narrowed their eyes as they attempted to calm down their hysterical apprentices. They were surprised by the sudden attack on their village, as no one in the village had foreseen any kind of attack. They couldn't fathom a reason as to why they were being attacked. Nothing of what they knew about the village relations with any of the other villages or any of the countries would allow them to explain whoever was responsible for such an out-of-nowhere attack. "Don't worry, Sayo-chan, everything will be fine. Case Cage Sama will deal with the attack with no issue," Pakura, who had studied for years under Chiyo as a former fuinjutsu apprentice herself, said to the female apprentice that was clutching to her fearfully. However, everyone in the bunker soon stiffened up when they heard a sinister chuckle echo throughout their location, which caused them to instantly go on guard. The three veteran ninja pulled their apprentices behind them as if to shield them from an attacker, and looked at the door to the bunker that opened up, two people entering through it and slamming it behind. The first one, the blonde-haired man in the pink outfit with the sinister symbol on the front of it, they didn't know, but they all widened their eyes when they recognized the red-headed woman with the twin swords strapped to her sides. "You should worry less about your pathetic village, and worry more about the two of us," said the blonde-haired 17-year-old, the person that was clearly responsible for the sinister laugh that they had all heard. Chiyo, as the designated leader of the fuinjutsu team, stepped forward and met the blonde's deathly cold blue eyes with her own eyes, glaring into his sapphire orbs with a challenging, furious gaze. She knew right away that these two were in league with the mysterious bomber that was attacking their village. "Who are you? How did you get down here, and why are you here?" Chiyo asked him with a furious hiss, to which Mercenary Dao smirked, and cracked his neck as he pulled out his sword. Amayuri following suit by pulling out her Kiba blades and charging them up with her chakra to summon the electricity around them. In that particular order, your executioner, none of your business, and for the answer to your third question, refer to my first answer, he said in a snarky manner. Shio, in response, quickly unraveled her carrying scroll, and summoned her Chikamatsu puppets. Shirahiji. Jiki Chikamatsu no Shu, she called out as she attached the chakra strings to her puppets and made them come to life. She knew that just by the mere presence of Amayuri, that these two were going to require all of her effort if she wanted to even have a chance of ensuring Sanagakure's prized Fuinjutsu team survived this encounter, Ebizo and Pakura preparing to assist her with the battle. In a flash, Amayuri and Mercenary Dao lunged at him, and just like that, the battle was on. Meanwhile, with Deidara, the former Iwa Nin cackled with delight as he continued to drop his beautiful works of down on the brutish Sanagakure ninja and unleashed his wondrous, explosive art down upon them. He was having the time of his life, as it had been a long while since he had gotten to cut like this, though he had made sure to try and conserve as much chakra as he possibly could, as well as his best explosives, for when the case cage had decided to make his appearance known. Luckily for Deidara, he wouldn't have to wait long, as in a flash, his ears had caught wind of a powerful jutsu being called out that was clearly being aimed at him. Doden. Dosakiryu, called out a voice as a large, menacing dragon made up from the ground formed and proceeded to snake and lunge at Deidara, who quickly proceeded to angle his clay bird away so that it wasn't destroyed. Upon looking in the direction of where the jutsu had come from, he grinned in a joyous manner when he saw none other than a furious Yondaime case cage glaring at him. I don't know why you've decided to attack Sanagakure, Deidara no Bakuden, but I can assure you that doing so will lead to your death. Iwagakure may not be doing anything about you, but I certainly will ensure your head is returned to your home village so I can collect your bounty, Rasa hissed at Deidara, which just caused the Bakuden user to smirk mockingly at the Yondaime case cage, and made a hand motion indicating for the redhead to bring it on. Would you care to run that by me again? Minato Namikaze asked his daughter in a baffled tone of voice, who was currently in front of his desk with her team. Minato, Kushina, and Jiraiya all looked at Team 7 in a shocked manner once they had been told of the details regarding their failed mission to Nami no Kuni. Every member of Team 7, except for Kakashi, shuffled their feet nervously and looked amongst each other. The guilt on their faces was obvious to everyone in the room that they didn't really feel particularly great about the path they chose to take by abandoning Tazuna to his fate. Sure, there was the fact that the client had lied and nearly got them into a situation they weren't prepared for. They had no idea just what they had been going into, and they were lucky they got out, but they still felt like they had condemned Nami no Kuni to death. Kakashi, being the team leader, closed his icha with a sigh, and stepped forward to deliver his report. He was the team leader, after all, and believed that the guilt his students felt would affect their ability to give a proper report. While he understood the guilt they were feeling, he couldn't risk their lives by walking into a situation with unknown enemy ninja. While they were quite well trained, and stronger than most rookie genin that enter the ninja ranks, they were still only genin. Up against at least one Junin-level Nuke Nin, and who knows who else had been working with Demon Brothers, he couldn't have continued the mission. While he was very confident in his own abilities, his students still weren't on the level necessary to risk going on an A- ranked mission. Besides, Kushina would have murdered him for going on such a dangerous mission with her daughter. We escorted the VIP out of Hai no Kuni as was required of us, but along the way, we came along a puddle on the road that shouldn't have been there, and two Chunin Kirigakure Nuke Nen called the Demon Brothers emerged from it so as to try and ambush Tazuna-san. However, due to quick thinking at the hands of Sasuke and Mito, they were quickly dispatched via utilizing a Gokakyu, Daitopa combination jutsu, resulting in them being turned to ashes. Turns out he had lied about the mission details, and that Gato of Gato Kanpani had seized control of the country, and was bleeding it dry. When Tazuna-san and the people of Nami no Kuni had tried to build a bridge to the mainland, Gato sent assassins after his life. While I fully trusted in my own beliefs, I felt it unwise to continue the mission with my genin team, and luckily for me, they agreed with me, Kakashi said, going over the details of the mission with a critical gaze. Minato sighed quietly to himself and rubbed his nose a bit. He had mixed feelings about the decision to just abandon Tazuna like they did. He understood that it was protocol for the teams to abandon a mission if the client had falsified the details of their mission request, but there was still the fact that by doing so, they were leaving a country in the hands of a tyrant who had enough money to hire multiple ninja to do his dirty work for him. He closed his eyes, and thought very deeply about what he should do. As much as he would like to just let Nami no Kuni stay in Gato's hands for Tazuna putting his daughter's life in danger, he knew that he couldn't just leave them to their fates. Everyone in Nami didn't deserve to suffer just because one of their countrymen had decided it was a wise idea to commit fraud against a ninja village. An idea suddenly came to him, and he straightened up. He would send another team to Nami no Kuni to help with the liberation of Nami no Kuni, but he would entrust this mission with a team that was more than capable of handling the job. This mission would get upgraded to an A- rank mission, potentially an S rank because of the unknown factor involving how many noob nin were involved, and what rank they were. With this in mind, he had decided to summon a team that he felt could truly get the job done, and considering which team it was, he was sure that they could handle any complications that might come up in the mission. Anbu Bat, summon me Yugo's Anbu team. I have an emergency mission for them. Minato called out to one of the Anbu guards hidden throughout the room. The Anbu in question bowed to the Yondaime, and disappeared in a shunshin. As he waited for Yugo and her team to get here so he could send them out, he turned to watch the interaction between his daughter and Kushina. Kushina hugged Mito in a protective, motherly manner. Unlike Minato, she didn't care that Team 7's decision might have led to the death of an entire country. She was just glad that her precious daughter was safe and sound, not a single hair on her head having been touched. Her only solace was that Tazuna was probably dead by now, because if he wasn't, she would have charged straight to Nami no Kuni and killed the drunken old Kaja herself for putting her daughter in danger when he had a chance to come clean about the true details of the mission. As far as she was concerned, he deserved everything Gato did to him. As long as her daughter was safe, she didn't care. I swear I'm not letting you out of my sight, any of you. You're some of my precious people, and I won't allow anyone to hurt you, Databane, she said to Team 7 excitedly, hugging all three of the teenagers tightly. Sighing in relief, she proceeded to turn her attention to Kakashi and smiled at him. You did the right thing, Kakashi. I'm glad you made the decision to come back instead of continuing on, because even if everyone had survived, I promise you that your name would have been on the Kia stone, she said to him in a proud manner, her eyes flashing with anger. Kakashi, in response, gulped nervously and started sweating, only calming down when Kushina's pleasant demeanor came back. Mito eagerly hugged her mother back, deciding that she really needed some comfort right about now, what with the tears streaming down her face. It was bad enough that they had left Tazuna behind, even though they were obliged to do so due to the client lying about the mission details, but on top of that, she had wasted her first genuine opportunity to find any clues to Naruto's whereabouts because she had been forced to go back home. As much as she didn't want to go back, she knew that it was only protocol to go back should a client happen to be deceptive with mission details or try to betray their guards. She had to make that decision, as much as she didn't want to, so she had decided, against her feelings, to be logical and smart about it. Sasuke felt a little uncomfortable in the embrace of the hyperactive redhead. While he was very grateful for her taking him in, and getting to hear so many stories about his mother back when she was a genin, he was still hesitant to get close to Kushina and anyone in the Hokage's family. He felt a bit awkward in the presence of the close-knit, loving family, but eventually, he had warmed up to them a bit. It helped that the Yondaime Hokage had told him stories of Uchiha, Obito, the Uchiha who had done the unthinkable and given up their clan's most prized possession, the Sharingan, on his deathbed purely so Kakashi-sensei could protect the love of his life in his stead. The stories of Obito had amused Sasuke, but had eventually caused him to loosen up and try to live up to his ideals, without any of the more amusing downsides. Sakura was the first one to get vocal. I just can't believe we decided to leave Nami no Kuni to its fate, she said in a downtrodden manner, which had resulted in the other members of Team 7 to bow their heads, before Kushina quickly distracted them by more positive things. Minato, upon seeing the mood they were in, quickly cleared his throat to get their attention, and pulled out another mission scroll, this one also a C rank. I have another C rank for you, right here in Hai no Kuni. According to our daimyo, his caravans have had a bit of an issue with bandits attacking them, and he has hired a team from Konoha to wipe out the bandit camps in the area. It should take you quite a bit, and unlike Tazuna, the mission details have been confirmed as C-rank level. Good luck to you Team 7 inches, he explained to them in his Hokage tone, which caused the members of Team 7 to bow in gratitude, before quickly being dismissed, Kushina following after them. Once they had left, Minato turned to Jiraiya, looking at him with a critical gaze. I want you to follow them and make sure that, in the very unlikely event that this mission isn't as it seems, you jump in and protect them should they need it. I don't want anything to happen to any of them. Is that understood, sensei? Minato asked Jiraiya with a serious inflection in his tone of voice, causing Jiraiya to nod his head in understanding, giving him an easy-going grin. No problem Minato, I'll ensure that they all come back safe and sound should things turn out wrong. You can count on me, Jiraiya said, before quickly disappearing out of the window to follow after Team 7, right at the moment where Yugo's Anbu team had come in. Upon seeing his trusted Anbu team, Minato let out a sigh of relief, and turned to them. Your mission is to go to Nami no Kuni, and ensure that their country is freed from the tyranny of Gato, by any means necessary. Expect at least an A-ranked nuke nin, maybe even an S rank, so prepare to fight with your lives should that happen. Dismissed, Minato said, giving them a short summary of their mission, and what to expect, which caused the Anbu to bow and then depart with Shunshuns. Once that was done, he turned back to the paperwork on his desk, and grinned as he summoned up some Kage Bunshin to take care of it, while he went back to working on the ceiling array he had on his desk. He had no idea that what the Anbu found in Nami no Kuni would bring him a blast from the past. Mercenary Dao vs Chiyo. Mercenary Dao squared off with Chiyo, making sure to evade the most likely poison-tipped senbon she shot at him with the help of her puppets. His eyes were focused on Chiyo right now, not even bothering to turn in Amayuri's direction. She was deemed an S-ranked ninja for a reason, after all, and as a result of that, had made sure to maintain his focus on the accursed poison's mistress of Sanagakure. The blonde narrowed his eyes in thought as he continued to skillfully bob and weave around the various weapons that Chiyo happened to have been launching from her puppets at him, deflecting those he couldn't avoid with a swipe of his bone sword. Chiyo, upon seeing this, proceeded to do something that would have taken most people off guard. While using her puppets to continue to harass him, she quickly exhaled a purple cloud of smoke at him, showcasing her mastery of the Dokugiri no Jutsu on such a level that she didn't even need to use hand seals for it. Upon noticing what had just been sent at him, he quickly utilized some incredible speed by pointing his arms out forwards, and spinning them at such a rate that it had caused miniature tornadoes to form on them, which then shot at the cloud of poison gas and blew it away with such force, that it had actually caused Chiyo to blink in surprise for a moment. That surprise was enough for Dao to launch a throwing knife at her, just enough that it would graze her shoulder, but nothing more than that, as Chiyo, despite being so old, still had finely honed physical skills, and as such, she was able to slide out of the way well enough to avoid getting any critical injuries. Seeing this made Dao narrow his eyes, knowing that he didn't poison his own weapons, since he preferred beating an enemy at their best just to prove how utterly inferior they were to him. Chiyo temporarily disabled the puppets she guided with her right hand, so she could fire a number of kunai at him, and Dao quickly zigzagged through each one she threw. Chiyo's face gave nothing away, but it was this lack of any emotion that made Mercenary Dao suspect something was up. Before his mind could comprehend what was going on, he caught the distinct sound of blades cutting through air, and only managed to duck and cover out of the way of the blades, the kunai missing him by a single inch. Scowling in irritation, he noticed that the kunai she threw had strings of chakra attached to them, indicating she used the Chakura no Ito in order to manipulate the blades into coming back at him, thus using her own form of the Soshujin. Scowling to himself in irritation, he retaliated by gathering ki into his eyes, and firing a pair of somasen at her, which Chiyo retaliated by bringing one of her puppets up in front of her and brought its arm up to summon a puppetry-based chakra shield to block his attack. Narrowing his eyes in annoyance, he was about to go on the attack once more, but unfortunately for Dao, Chiyo was no slouch, and as such, she quickly launched her kunai at Dao, before ending their manipulation and activating her other 5 puppets once more. The fabled mercenary quickly deflected them with well-timed hits of his bone sword, but this was just a distraction, as before he knew it, Chiyo had him surrounded with all 10 of her puppets. Before he could realize what it was that she had done, he was quickly assaulted with a barrage of various throwing weapons, and considering the sheer number of them, he would be unable to dodge them all. Realizing her game, he let out a scream and summoned up an explosive wave with a mighty scream. The minor explosion he summoned up causing the blades be blown harshly back towards Chiyo and her puppets, which she quickly dodged herself, and had her puppets launch them away by backhanding them away with her puppets. Dao tried to go on the attack once more, but yet again, Sanagakure's poison mistress had him covered, as she quickly lashed out with one of the puppets behind him, who moved in at him with blades poking out of its body like a porcupine, and spinning wildly. Mercenary Dao, though, had a keen awareness of his surroundings, and responded by jumping in the air to avoid the attack, making sure not to jump too high and result in him hitting the ceiling of the bunker, and fired a well-placed dodonpa at the puppet. Normally, the damage dealt with the dodonpa would have put a target down, but as this was a puppet, the only thing his most prized technique did was cut off the functions to the left side of its body, which was enough to cripple it. The blonde assassin didn't have time to celebrate though, as Chiyo took advantage of his airtime, and manipulated one of her puppets to lash out at him with a barrage of chains that wrapped around him, and then proceeded to chain him to the ceiling. Dao struggled to get out of the grasp of the chains, but they were holding together, even when he tapped into his full strength. Chiyo wasted no time in taking advantage, and used her lion-headed cannon, one of her Chikamatsu puppets firing a small ball that quickly morphed into a large, white-headed lion head that raced towards him and slammed into him, further trapping him up against the ceilings by increasing the strength of his bindings. The second great shinobi war veteran smirked to herself, and decided to try and finish him off, by quickly having her puppets lunge at him, swords extending out of their mouths, which gave Dao plenty of indication as to what she had planned. Just as they did their dog pile on him and were about to impale him, he summoned up an energy shield that expelled out from his body and launched not only the puppets back, but forcefully expelled his bindings off of him, but only barely. As he descended to the ground, his eyes caught sight of one of the Chikamatsu puppets, and used his ki to force him downwards like a rocket, where he then thrust it out with his sword, and managed to cut the targeted puppet in half, which meant the elimination of 2 of her 10 puppets. Great, only 8 more to go, then. Just as Dao was about to go on the attack once more, he suddenly felt something grab a hold of him, and he felt a sword go between his ribs. Coughing up a bit of blood, he looked behind him to find that the puppet he thought he disabled earlier in the fight had, miraculously, been manipulated by Chiyo reasonably enough to attack him. Growling in irritation, but relieved that the poor state of the puppet had resulted in anything vital being missed, he let out a scream as he summoned up another explosive wave, causing the puppet and the sword to be vaporized, this time putting that puppet out of commission. He landed on the ground feet first, but unfortunately for him, Chiyo was on the attack once more, and 4 of her puppets came at him from every cardinal direction, attempt to use them as battering rams of sorts. Or at least, that's what it seemed like she was doing. In reality, they had stopped short, and enwrapped him up in chains once more. The 4 of them then started circling him at high speeds, wanting to crush him to death in the chains by wrapping them as tightly around him as they could. Already, Dao could feel his body feeling the effects of the ever-growing tightness. Grunting in pain, he slowly started to spin with the chains, only barely managing to summon up a hyper-tornado that managed to shred through the chains, though the puppet mistress reacted quickly enough to get her puppets out of the way. Unfortunately for her, though, he seemed to anticipate that she would do that, and quickly reacted by rapid-firing his dodonpa at them one by one, something that caught her off guard enough that resulted in 2 more of her puppets being taken out of commission, though the other 2 managed to escape unscathed. Chiyo, in another display of experience, quickly inhaled, and fired a compressed ball of wind at Mercenary in the form of a non-explosive futon. Rinkuden, causing his ribs to be cracked from the force of the ball hitting him. Using his ability to block out pain, he continued on with his fight, and hurled a barrage of throwing knives at 2 of her puppets in a way that they would be forced into a wall, and bound there, or so it seemed. Chiyo had them deflect the kunai, but Dao was already on the move, winding up behind one of the puppets, and swiftly cutting it up into pieces with his sword. He was about to turn his attention to one of the puppets, when the 2 puppets that he had hit with his dodonpa had tried to come up behind him again. Learning from his mistake last time, however, he had heard them coming, and back-flipped over the 2 of them, landing on the floor with his feet, and then lunging forward at them and firing a pair of basic energy waves at them. Needless to say, the two were vaporized, bringing the puppets down to 5. Noticing this for herself, Chio was quick to move the control of the remaining 5 puppets to her right hand, leaving the left free for whatever purpose she had in mind for it. She then directed 3 of her puppets into a triangular formation, having them perform her Sanbo Kyukai, the 3 puppets summoning up a powerful vortex of air that started sucking Dao towards them. Dao made use of the flight ability to keep himself from being sucked in, and he saw all of the puppet pieces get sucked in and them crushed and ground up through the back of the puppets. Narrowing his eyes as he smirked, he quickly fired a small energy wave into the vortex, causing it to get sucked up and lead right to the puppets, causing them to be vaporized. Now there was only 2 more puppets left to go, and Dao was going to try and be quick to dispose of them, but unfortunately for him, Chio was quick to go on the attack, but what surprised him was that she didn't do it with her puppets. No, instead, she summoned a sword from a ceiling scroll, and quickly lunged at him with it using her free hand, causing him to be locked into a clashing of blades. Smirking in amusement over her foolish attempt, he easily tossed her back using his incredible strength, and was about to run right through her, when she expertly directed one of her last 2 remaining puppets to take the blow, but in exchange for having the puppet to wrap its limbs around the blonde mercenary to keep him there. Chio acted quickly, and quickly threw her sword through the puppet, making sure to aim for places that wouldn't cripple it, causing the sword to go through the puppet and impale itself through Dao, missing his heart by only a few inches. Coughing up another glob of blood, he let out a scream and summoned up another explosive wave to destroy the puppet, but the sword she used on him mysterious only came flying back to her, somehow surviving the explosion. Not bothering to waste brainpower on thinking how that happened, he did something to surprise Chio, and belched out a mouth energy wave at her last puppet, and due to the surprise factor, she was thus unable to direct it away from the blast, resulting in the destruction of her last Chikamatsu puppet. Smirking in pride over disarming the puppet mistress of her strongest attacks, the bounty hunter then lunged at her to try and finish her off, but Chio was showing surprising spryness and actually managing to block, dodge, and deflect his blows. He had to grudgingly give her credit. While she was old, she was showing why she was considered a cage-level shinobi. The two danced a deadly dance, but then Chio surprised him by getting within his guard and making use of chakra flow via her wind chakra in order to make a deep slash across his chest, which only added to the damage done to him so far. Clapping his hands mockingly as he jumped away from her, he proceeded to mock her. "Not bad, old woman, not bad. However, your greatest weapons are gone, and you'll quickly join the rest of your wretched family in the abyss that is hell," he said to her in a snide manner, before freezing up when he started noticing that his movements started getting sluggish, and he was feeling some sluggishness take over him. His heart even started beating irregularly, and his breathing was getting heavier. Chio, upon noticing this, smirked at him quietly, and that was when Dao realized that she must have poisoned the blades her puppets used to pierce through him. Since all poisons used by ninja had some chakra properties, the poison in his system was acting very slowly, but it was starting to kick in now, even with his lack of chakra dulling some of the effect. Dao glared at her angrily and was about to finish her off, when she quickly attached some chakra no ito to him and started directing his blows away from her, stringing him along this way and that so she could hold him off for as long as possible until her poison finally did him in. Eventually, the poison was so strong that he felt paralysis overcome him, and he slowly collapsed to the floor, developing a cold sweat. Chio stood over him victoriously with a smirk on her face, and reared her sword up over her head, before she suddenly felt pain in her chest, collapsing to the floor, before darkness overcame her. Team 7, who were secretly being shadowed by Jiraiya, quickly moved through the wilderness of Hai no Kuni via the usage of the Shunshin no Jutsu, and as such, were able to quickly make their way to the location of the bandit camp, all of them hiding expertly in the trees and looking at the assembled group of hoodlums with narrowed eyes. They were ready to begin their siege at any moment, but all they needed to start was the signal to do so, but they didn't have to wait long, as Sasuke quickly strung together a set of hand seals, and with a whisper, summoned up the Kokwangyo no Jutsu, the A-ranked genjutsu that would summon up a shroud of darkness around the victims. Now that the bandits were completely covered in darkness, Team 7 began their attack, minus Kakashi who sat back and decided to let them have the bandits to themselves. After all, he believed that they wouldn't be an issue for his team. Doden. Domu. Sakura called out, summoning up her precious Doden jutsu that gave her a hardened form of stone around her body, which also gave her increased strength to go with it. Not wasting a single moment, she quickly started darting towards each of the bandits, using the Shunshin no Jutsu in combination with her Doden Domu so she could use her own body as a walking projectile, acting very much like a human wrecking ball at that moment. She had learned from Kakashi-sensei that enemies were to be dealt with as quickly as possible, no holding off, no showing off techniques, no testing herself, just quick dispatching. So, she was quick to shatter bones and reduce bandits to smears on the ground with each hit she unleashed on them. Sasuke was quick to join in on the attack, unleashing genjutsu after genjutsu on his opponents to bind them, or even force them to turn their weapons on their own comrades. While he was still very much a frontline fighter, the usage of genjutsu allowed him to conserve his energy in the event of a more dangerous scenario were to come by. He didn't even bother trying to kill them, instead preferring to turn them on each other with his precious genjutsu. When he had the time, he was going to personally thank Yuhi-sensei for the tutelage in genjutsu, that was for sure. Mito, not to be left out, quickly showed off her incredible grace and speed by slashing through the bandits with quick, precise strikes of her precious Chikudo. The bandits didn't even stand a chance. They might have were they happened to have gone against a normal genin team, but Team 7 were far from ordinary. Mito's eyes were iced over with determination, using this as a stepping stone to getting the ability to find her brother, and convince him to come back. She had her first kill a while ago, along with Sakura and Sasuke, so they didn't even bat an eye over the act of slaughter they were unleashing upon the bandits. The fight was far from fair, the bandits didn't even have a chance. By the time was over and done with, Kakashi joined them in the middle of the miniature battlefield, and clapped his hands in a congratulatory manner. Ma, that was quite impressive, you there. Only thing that is left is to destroy the camp, and to get rid of the corpses, Kakashi said to them, which caused the three genin to nod their heads in understanding. They quickly took out their incendiary tags, and quickly set everything up, from the makeshift buildings to piling up the corpses. After activating their tags with a set of hand seals, the campsite burst into flames, and everything there was reduced to cinders. With everything done, Team 7 quickly made their way back to Konoha, being tailed by an impressed Jiraiya. In the Sanagakure bunker, Amayuri grinned in a bloodthirsty manner as she eagerly twirled her electrified Kiba blades around in her hands as she looked over her two opponents. Ebizo and Pakura, both very worthy opponents in their own right. While Pakura wouldn't be on her level normally, with Ebizo as backup, I was safe to say that she was going to be a pesky opponent to fight. Good, all the more enjoyment for her, then. She didn't even turn her attention to Dao once, trusting in his ability to get the job done. Looking them both up and down with a shark-like grin on her face, she narrowed her eyes at them when she noticed that both Pakura and Ebizo had pulled out katanas, and since they were both futon wielders, it was safe to say that they knew chakra flow. The futon chakra would act as dampeners for her Raiden chakra-infused blades, unfortunately, but that was yet one more challenge to add to the fun. In a flash, both Ebizo and Pakura charged at Amayuri, attempting to bring their blades crashing down on top of the ex-Kiri Nen. However, Amayuri was fully prepared for the assault, and brought her blades up to meet theirs, which resulted in a perfectly stalemate. Even with them using both of their hands to push down, and her holding them back with one blade in each arm only, her womanly frame deceived eyes that looked upon her, as she possessed impeccable strength herself. Sparks flew between their blades, and though they clearly did try to push down on her, Ebizo and Pakura weren't having any luck. Deciding that they weren't getting anywhere, they quickly jumped away from her, and then attempted to double-team her with a Shunshin-infused slash of their blades, to which the red-headed tomboy responded by summoning up a lightning-based shockwave with her Kiba blades that blasted them away before their attacks could land. They quickly righted themselves in the air and bounced off of the wall with their feet, forming a chain of hand seals for some of their techniques, Pakura firing a Kaden Gokakyu no Jutsu, and Ebizo moving in behind Amayuri and attempting to hit her with a Kei's no Yaiba. Amayuri quickly darted to the side to avoid both of the attacks, and decided to target Pakura first, since she was the weaker of her two opponents. Quickly darting into the shadows, she attempted to sneak up behind the Sanagakure Kunoichi and run her through, But Pakura somehow knew she was there, darted out of the way with the Shunshin no Jutsu, appearing right behind Amayuri and attempting to exhale a small amount of Kaden chakra out of her mouth to try and set Amayuri ablaze with a burst of fire. The S-ranked Kiri Nen quickly sprinted out of the way of the attack, only for Ebizo to wind up behind her and attempting to bind her with ninja wire. Out of instinct, she brought her swords up to prevent the wire from fully trapping her, and after forcefully prying the ninja wire off of her with her blades, she slid out underneath the wires with no injuries, only to have Pakura launch a Kaden Hosenka no Jutsu at her. Quickly focusing her Kiba blades together, she fired a bolt of Raiden chakra from her blades that overpowered the small fireballs, and only barely missed Pakura. This distraction allowed Ebizo to go on the attack once more, and in a flash, he had gathered his futon chakra, and fired a spiraling wind ball at her, which she only barely avoided by twisting her body to the side to avoid the attack. Once again, she turned to fight Pakura once more, only to realize that Pakura was no longer where she was. She was suddenly blasted in the left side by a powerful blast of wind that caused her to crash into the wall, gasping for air. Quickly overcoming this sudden shock, she performed a set of hand seals, and with a shout of, "Sweden! Teppadama!" she fired a quick bullet of water at Pakura, causing her to undergo the same treat that Amayuri herself had just experienced. Amayuri attempted to take advantage and tried to fry her with a bolt of lightning from her Kiba blades, but at the last moment, she felt something tug on her arms, and it resulted in her missing her shot. Raising her eyebrows in surprise, she noticed a Chakura no Ito on her arms, which lead back to Ebizo. Seeing this caused Amayuri to grimace, and with a snarl, she quickly tossed her Kiba blades into the air, and quickly fired a Raiden Jabashi at Ebizo, summoning a powerful wave of lightning to try and rip through him. Ebizo quickly used the Shunshin no Jutsu to avoid the Raiden Jutsu, and he moved in on her, making sure to position himself in front of Pakura to shield her from Amayuri's eyes. Amayuri narrowed her eyes, and was about to lunge at Ebizo when he suddenly moved out of the way, revealing that during the moment he had shielded her, Pakura had unleashed one of her Shikuden Jutsu, firing a couple of flaming orbs in the form of the Shikuden Kajosatsu, which caused Amayuri to spit out a Sweden Mizurapa to dispel the flaming orbs. While normally, the wave would continue on, the heat from the flaming orbs were so intense that they evaporated the water, both attacks causing steam to erupt around them. Amayuri quickly moved in on Pakura while she had the chance, but unfortunately for her, the Shikuden wielder somehow knew where she was, and managed to avoid Amayuri's lethal throat slice by sliding down to the ground and then scooting away from her, throwing a kunai at her as she darted away. Futon Repusho, Pakura called out as she fired her futon jutsu at the kunai she threw, increasing its lethality and speed. Amayuri scoffed at this rudimentary trick, and she easily stepped out of its path. However, that was the distraction that the two had needed, and they retaliated by firing both a futon Renkuden from Ebizo, and a Kaden Garyuka no Jutsu from both sides of her. In a flash, they descended upon her, and it seemed like they hit her, judging by the resulting burst of flames and steam to pop up. Pakura and Ebizo were seasoned ninja, though, and didn't take their eyes off of where their opponent was. Upon the steam clearing, it was revealed that Amayuri had somehow gathered the amount of water necessary to summon up a Sushin Suijinheki that protected her from the resulting combination attack. Narrowing their eyes, both of the ninja immediately realized that the air was a bit drier, and that was when they came to the conclusion she had summoned up the required water from the moisture in the air. Amayuri quickly let down her Sweden barrier, and quickly summoned up another shockwave of lightning to knock them both back. The attack worked, and they were both knocked back by Amayuri, who took advantage by gathering up her chakra, and forming the proper hand seals. Raiden Gion, she called out, firing a spear made of lightning as she tried to eviscerate Pakura with her attack. She was partially successful, in that she had managed to pierce through her shoulder in such a way that she paralyzed the woman's left arm. Pakura, to her credit, showed no signs of pain, her face as resolute and stoic as always. Quickly sliding her katana back into its sheath, she quickly pulled out a kunai, and used the Hin no Jutsu as she charged at the Kirigakure Nuke Nin, Amayuri easily avoiding her attacks due to the differences in their abilities. However, as the battle had clearly proven thus far, things weren't that easy, as right when Pakura had reached her, she suddenly performed a Kawarimi no Jutsu with Ebizo, who lashed out with a K's no Yaba. Amayuri's eyes widened, and she only barely managed to avoid the lethal attack, though she took a devastating gash across her stomach during her attempt to avoid it, one that gushed blood. Grimacing to herself as she tried to ignore the pain, she quickly hit Ebizo in the face with a headbutt that broke his nose, and sent him staggering back from the force of the blow. She then quickly bit his arm, and ripped a chunk out of his bicep with her sharp teeth. She spit out what she had ripped from the Sanagakure elder, and managed to get off a lucky slash that had sent shocks of electricity into his already damaged arm when her blades cut deeper into his wound, and even pierced through the bone. Pulling her Kiba blade out, she then kicked Ebizo away from her, sending him crashing into the wall. Deciding that she had taken care of him for the moment, she attempted to locate Pakura, only to feel an intense coming from behind her, which instinctively caused her to dive out of the way of the attack, just barely avoiding the large flaming orb the Shikuden wielder had sent at her. Glaring across at the green-haired woman, she retaliated by pressing her Kiba blades together, and summoning a ball of lightning in between the blades. With a shout of Raikyu, Amayuri fired said ball of lightning at Pakura, who retaliated by making it clash with one of her Sakuden flaming orbs. But what surprised Amayuri was how the Shikuden orbs had managed to just overpower her lightning ball. Thinking quickly, she quickly used the Kawarimi no Jutsu to switch with Grand Elder Ebizo, who was perfectly aware of what happened, and got out of the way by darting to the side. Seeing that Ebizo was alright, Pakura attempted to focus on Amayuri once more, only to wind up with one of the Kiba blades in her chest, which sent shocks and pain through her body. Letting out a gasping cough, she looked behind her, and saw that Amayuri had thrown the Kiba blade. Amayuri, upon seeing the shock on her face, quickly smirked at her. I found it odd how you were able to react to me in advance of what I did, so I had decided to test out what you could do, and you didn't even seem to notice that I threw the blade. I believe that's game, she said with an evil grin on her face, before grasping the hilt of her Kiba blade, and summoning up the electricity in it once more, causing Pakura to let out screams of pain as she was fried. Once Pakura had stopped responding, Amayuri quickly pulled her Kiba blade out, and turned her attention to Ebizo, lunging at him and engaging in a fierce sword duel with him. Ebizo grunted to himself, feeling his age and fatigue catch up with him. He didn't train as much as Chiyo did, so he was starting to reach his limits. Amayuri apparently noticed this, and with an evil grin, she surprised him by firing a Sweden Mazurapa at him, quickly slamming him into the wall with such force that she had caused his neck to snap in a fatal manner. Panting to herself, she turned to see how Dao was doing, and noticed the predicament that Chiyo had him in. Narrowing her eyes, she continued to pant to herself as the loss of blood was slowly starting to get to her. Having time to dress her wounds a bit, she quickly wrapped herself up, and then surprised Chiyo by impaling her through the heart with one of her Kiba blades. The old bat died with a look of pained shock on her face. Panting to herself as she saw the barrier protecting the apprentices disappear, she grinned in a tired, but still very bloodthirsty manner, and had attacked them, mauling them brutally as she realized that she had to get this over and done with as soon as possible. Once they were all done for, she panted as she sheathed her swords, and started sealing all of the corpses up into her scroll. She then threw the unconscious mercenary Dao on her back, and quickly sprinted for the exit. It was such a shame for her, and the rest of the ninja world, that she didn't notice some odd, half-black and half-white, yellow-eyed man in the same cloak as Deidara, complete with some kind of plant growth, sprouted from the ground. Zetsu smirked to himself, and looked down at the unconscious Pakura in his arms, the real Pakura. Mission accomplished. I'm sure Madara-sama will be very pleased with getting Pakura in his hands, came the dual voices of Zetsu, as he slunk into the ground with Pakura in his arms to report back to the true leader of the Akatsuki.
That's all for now. If you want to see next part, then please like this video and subscribe my channel. Thank you.